My parents refused to take me to the hospital when I went into labor. They said, "We're busy with your brother's engagement party. Figure it out." I had to give birth all alone. After that, I cut them off. 3 months later, my mom called me, sounding scared. "Why is the bank freezing our account?" she asked. I smiled and said, "Ask your favorite child." Growing up, I never felt like I truly belonged in my family. My younger brother, Daniel, was their favorite. They always praised him and cared about what he wanted. I was always an afterthought. But nothing prepared me for what happened when I went into labor. I got pregnant at 21. It wasn't planned, and the baby's father left as soon as he found out. I was scared but ready to face the challenge. I thought having a baby would make my parents finally see me and care about me. I was so wrong. Daniel got engaged around the same time I was close to giving birth. My parents were thrilled and threw him a big fancy engagement party. Meanwhile, I was ignored. On the day of the party, I started feeling pain. Then my water broke in the living room. I panicked and called my mom, who was already at the party. "Mom, it's happening. I need to go to the hospital." She replied, sounding irritated, "We're really busy right now. Can't you figure it out?" I was shocked. "Mom, please," I begged, but she cut me off. "I can't deal with this right now. Call an Uber or something. We'll talk later." Then she hung up. I stood there, feeling like I'd been struck by lightning. They weren't coming. They didn't care. I was completely alone. I ordered an Uber while trying not to scream from the pain. The driver looked nervous the whole ride. I barely made it to the hospital in time and gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. No one was there to support me, not my mom, dad, or brother. I looked at my daughter's tiny fingers holding mine and made a decision. I was done with them. The next day, I blocked their numbers. When they tried to contact me, I ignored them. When they showed up to visit, I refused to see them. Then 3 months later, my mom called, sounding desperate. "Why is the bank freezing our account?" My parents had been using my trust fund for years to pay for things, including Daniel's engagement party. But once I turned 22, the trust fund became fully mine. With the help of a lawyer, I took control of my money and cut them off. I calmly replied to my mom's call, "Ask your favorite child," and hung up. For a few days, everything was quiet. Then, one morning, I opened my door and found my mom standing there. She looked terrible, messy hair, no makeup, and her face full of anger. "How dare you, Sophia?" she snapped. "You froze our money. Are you insane?" I laughed. "Our money?" "No, Mom. My money. The money you weren't supposed to touch in the first place." She scoffed. "Do you have any idea what you've done? We have bills. We have responsibilities." "You mean Daniel?" I said. "Because let's be honest, Mom, that's who you really care about. You can't pay for his wedding anymore, can you?" My mom flinched but quickly tried to act tough. "That's not the point. We're a family. Families share. You're punishing us over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You left me to give birth alone, Mom. You told me to figure it out while you hosted his party. So no, I don't owe you anything." Her eyes turned cold. For a moment, I thought she might slap me. Instead, she did something worse. She smiled. It was a mean, icy smile. "Oh, honey," she said softly, "you have no idea what you've just started." Then she left. I didn't know what she meant until 3 days later when I got served court papers. The lawsuit. My parents were suing me. They claimed they'd been using my trust fund because they thought I was fine with it. Now, they were arguing that since the money was spent on family expenses, I had no right to cut them off. It was ridiculous. But the worst part, Daniel was part of the lawsuit. I thought maybe he'd say this was too much, but no. He was right there in the legal papers, saying that because my parents used the money to raise me when I was a kid, I owed them. I wanted to scream, but instead, I called my lawyer. The family smear campaign. While I was preparing my defense, my mom started spreading lies about me. She told everyone in the family I was greedy and ungrateful, that I had taken their money when they needed it most. Relatives started calling. Some wanted to hear my side of the story, but others just yelled at me, calling me selfish and cruel. The worst call was from my grandmother's sister, Aunt Lydia. She was furious. "Your parents took care of you for years," she snapped. "And this is how you repay them? By making them suffer." I was so angry, I almost broke my teeth from clenching them. Making them suffer? They left me to give birth alone, Aunt Lydia. They didn't care about me, not then, not now. She scoffed. Oh, please. They had an event to host. You could have waited. I hung up on her without saying another word. By then, I was beyond angry. I was done. If my parents wanted to play dirty, then I was ready to fight back. I wasn't helpless anymore. I had my own lawyer, my own money, and most importantly, I had proof. Since I had been getting ready to take control of my trust fund for months, I had all the evidence, bank statements, financial records, and proof of every dollar they took. I decided to countersue, not just to protect my money, but to get back every cent they stole over the years. When my parents got my lawsuit, the calls and texts started pouring in. My mom's messages were angry and full of insults, like, how could you do this to your own family? My dad, who'd been mostly quiet, finally called. Sophia, he said, sounding tired. Let's be reasonable. We're your parents. You can't do this to us. I took a deep breath. You did this to yourselves. He sighed. Your mom's just emotional. You know how she is. She doesn't mean it. She meant every word, I snapped. Just like she meant it when she left me alone during labor. Silence. Then his voice turned cold. You're making a mistake. And he hung up. A few weeks into the legal fight, my lawyer found something strange. There was another savings account in my name that I didn't know about. We looked into it and found out that my grandparents had left me more money than I thought. And my parents had been secretly taking money from that account for years. This wasn't a family issue, it was theft. My lawyer quickly decided to push for fraud charges. When my parents found out, my mom completely broke down. She showed up at my apartment, banging on the door like crazy. Sophia, open this door, she yelled. I let her scream for a while before opening it just a crack. She looked wild, hair a mess, face pale. Why are you doing this? She hissed. Do you want us to end up homeless? Ruined. You stole from me, Mom, for years. She rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic. We used that money to take care of you. No, I said firmly. You used it to throw parties for Daniel, to go on vacations, to buy your stuff, not mine. She clenched her jaw. Fine, maybe we borrowed a little here and there, but we're family. Family doesn't leave you alone when you're giving birth. Family doesn't steal from you and then sue you for taking back what's yours. Her face twisted with anger. You always were selfish. I smiled. And you always thought you'd get away with everything. And before she could say anything else, I shut the door in her face. I expected my parents to keep fighting. What I didn't expect was what Daniel did next. Turns out, Daniel's fiancée had no idea about the lawsuit until recently. She called me and asked if we could talk. We met at a coffee shop, and she told me Daniel had lied to her. He said I had offered my trust fund to help pay for their wedding, and that I was happy to share. I told him if he doesn't drop this lawsuit, the wedding is off, she said, gripping her coffee cup so hard her knuckles turned white. I'm not marrying into a family that does this. I just stared at her, surprised she actually had a backbone. A few days later, Daniel texted me. I hope you're happy. You ruined my life. No apology, no regret, just blame. I blocked his number. At this point, my parents were trapped. The fraud case was gaining traction. Daniel's engagement was falling apart. And with their money cut off, they were drowning. Then, out of nowhere, my dad texted me. Let's talk. No lawyers. Just family. I stared at the screen, knowing this was their last attempt to manipulate me. But I agreed to meet them, just to see them squirm. We met at a fancy restaurant, my mom's choice, of course. They were already sitting when I walked in. Mom had her arms crossed, looking angry, while Dad looked tired and worn out. All right, talk, I said, not even bothering with pleasantries. Dad leaned forward. Sophia, this has gone too far. We're family. You're tearing this family apart over money. I let out a bitter laugh. No, you tore this family apart when you left me alone to give birth, when you stole from me, when you sued me. My mom scoffed. Oh, please, we took care of you for years. We deserve something for that. You had a child, I shot back. That was your responsibility. You don't get paid for raising your own kid. She flinched, but I kept going. You stole my money for years, lied to me, and then tried to destroy me for taking back what's mine. So no, you don't get to play the victims. For the first time, my dad looked ashamed. His eyes dropped like he couldn't even face me. But my mother, she doubled down. Leaning in, Voice sharp, she said, "You don't understand. We needed that money. Without it, we're ruined." I tilted my head. "Oh, and whose fault is that?" Silence. Then, in a whisper, she said, "Yours." I laughed, a harsh, bitter laugh that made her face twist in anger. "That's rich. You really think I should feel guilty after everything you did?" She slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. People started to glance our way. "I raised you," she snapped. "I gave you everything." I stood up. "No, Mom, you gave everything to Daniel, and now he's left you to clean up his mess. Just like always." Her face turned pale, and as if summoned, Daniel walked in. He looked awful, red eyes, messy hair. His fiancée must have finally called off the wedding because he looked completely lost. But when he saw me, his face twisted with rage. "This is your fault," he spat. "You ruined everything." I crossed my arms. "You did that all by yourself." He stormed over, fists clenched. "You think you're some victim. You think you're better than us." "No," I said calmly, "but I am free." His jaw tightened. "You're nothing. You were never supposed to have that money. You were never supposed to." "Never supposed to what?" I interrupted. "Stand up for myself. Take back what was mine." "You're selfish," he growled. "A selfish, bitter little." "Enough," my dad cut in. We all turned to him, and for the first time, I saw something real in his expression. Regret. Deep, crushing regret. "This isn't her fault," he said softly. "It's ours." My mother's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "We did this. We spoiled Daniel. We enabled him. We stole from our own daughter and acted like it was our right. We left her alone when she needed us the most." He looked at me, his face shattered with guilt. "I'm sorry, Sophia." And that, more than anything, stunned me. My mother was furious. "You're apologizing to her," she hissed. "After everything?" "Yes," my dad said, "because she was right." The silence that followed was heavy, and for the first time, my mother understood she had lost. The lawsuit was dropped a week later. I didn't forgive them completely, but I let the fraud charges go under one condition. They had to pay back every cent they stole. It took them years. Daniel never spoke to me again. My mother never forgave me either. She still plays the victim, telling anyone who'll listen that I ruined the family. My dad tried. He sent letters, called on birthdays, but I never let him fully back in. Some wounds just don't heal. And me? I raised my daughter in peace. I built a life for us, and I never once looked back.
I should have known something was amiss the moment Alara asked me to join her and Liam for a special family dinner. My daughter, ever perceptive, must have sensed the trepidation in my eyes as I nodded in agreement, for she quickly squeezed my hand, offering a reassuring smile. As we gathered around the table that evening, the weight of Alara's news hung heavy in the air. Liam, ever the picture of poise, gently cleared his throat and proclaimed, "Rowena, Mom, I'm honored to tell you that Alara and I are engaged." In an instant, the room fell silent, save for the clatter of silverware against porcelain. Vivienne, Liam's mother, sat poised, her brow furrowed in what I could only describe as disdain. I glanced at Alara, her eyes shining with joy, completely oblivious to the tempest brewing. "Engaged?" Vivienne's voice dripped with feigned surprise. "How delightful!" She paused, her gaze flickering between Alara and me. "Of course, this is all rather sudden. Don't you think, darling?" Her eyes narrowed as she addressed her son. Liam's brow furrowed, and I could see the discomfort in his expression. "Mother, Alara and I have been dating for over 2 years. We've discussed this at length, and we're both certain this is the right decision." Vivienne's lips curled into a tight smile, her eyes never leaving mine. "Of course, my dear, but surely you both understand the gravity of such a commitment." She turned to Alara, her tone dripping with false concern. "Alara, my dear, have you considered the challenges you might face?" Her gaze pointedly swept over Alara's casual attire, a silent judgment. I felt a familiar fire ignite within me, but before I could respond, Alara spoke up, her voice steady and unwavering. "Mrs. Westbrook, Liam and I are fully committed to each other. We've carefully considered all aspects of our future together." Vivienne's eyes narrowed, and she let out a soft, mirthless chuckle. "My dear, I'm simply concerned for your well-being. After all, you've yet to complete your higher education." Her gaze flicked to me, a thinly veiled jab. And your mother, well, she's hardly the exemplary role model one might hope for. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the tension palpable. I watched as Alara's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Mrs. Westbrook, I can assure you that my decision to forego college was a carefully considered one. Liam and I are building a life together, and that's all that matters to us. Vivienne's lips curled into a sardonic smile. How admirable. She turned to Liam, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Darling, surely you can see the folly in this arrangement. Alara may be a lovely girl, but she simply doesn't have the social standing or refinement befitting our family. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, my hands clenched into fists under the table. Alara's eyes had gone wide, her expression a mixture of hurt and indignation. Liam, poor Liam, looked utterly helpless, torn between his mother's demands and his love for my daughter. Clearing my throat, I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. Vivienne, I understand your concerns, but I can assure you that Alara is more than capable of handling the responsibilities of marriage. She's a driven, intelligent young woman, and her lack of a college degree in no way diminishes her worth or her ability to be a loving, supportive partner to your son. Vivienne's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of something akin to fear flickering behind her icy facade. We shall see about that, won't we, Rowena? With that, she rose from the table, her chair scraping against the polished hardwood floor with a grating screech. Come, Liam. I believe it's time we were going. As Vivienne swept out of the room, Liam cast an apologetic glance in Alara's direction before hurrying after his mother. I reached across the table, taking Alara's hand in mine, my heart aching at the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. Oh, my darling, I murmured, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. I promise you, we'll get through this, together. The drive home from the disastrous dinner was a silent one. Alara's shoulders hunched as she stared out the passenger window, her expression unreadable. I couldn't blame her for her subdued demeanor. Vivienne's cruel words had struck a nerve, shattering the joy that had shone so brightly in Alara's eyes just moments before. As I pulled into the driveway, I reached over and gently squeezed Alara's hand. Hey, it'll be okay. I promise. Alara turned to face me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. How can you be so sure, Mom? Vivienne clearly despises me. What if she won't let Liam marry me? I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. Alara, listen to me. Liam loves you, and that's all that matters. Vivienne may try to stand in your way, but I won't let her. You're my daughter, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect your happiness. Alara nodded, her expression resolute. I know, Mom. I hate feeling so powerless. Vivienne was so cruel, and I could see the doubt in Liam's eyes. What if she convinces him to call off the engagement? Then we'll fight for it, I replied, my voice firm. Vivienne may have wealth and social standing, but she doesn't have the one thing that truly matters, a loving, devoted family, and that's something she'll never be able to take from us. Alara managed a small smile, and we headed inside, both of us lost in thought. As we settled on the couch, the doorbell rang, startling us both. I rose, peering through the peephole, only to find Vivienne standing on the other side, her expression unreadable. I took a steadying breath and opened the door. Vivienne, to what do I owe this unexpected visit? Vivienne's lips curled into a sneer. May I come in, Rowena? I'm afraid we have some matters to discuss. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Of course, please, have a seat. Vivienne swept past me, her gaze sweeping the modest interior of our home with thinly veiled disdain. She perched on the edge of the armchair, her back ramrod straight. I'll get straight to the point, Rowena. I cannot, in good conscience, allow my son to marry your daughter. Alara's eyes widened, and I felt a surge of protective anger. Vivienne, you have no right to dictate Liam's choices. He's a grown man, and he loves Alara. That's all that should matter. Vivienne's eyes narrowed, her voice cold and calculated. Oh, but I do have a say in this matter. As Liam's mother and the matriarch of our family, it is my duty to ensure he marries someone befitting of our lineage, and I'm afraid your daughter simply doesn't measure up. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into the palms of my hands. Vivienne, how dare you? Let me finish, Rowena, Vivienne interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. I've done some research, and I must say, I'm rather disappointed in what I've discovered about you and your daughter." My heart pounded in my chest as a sense of dread began to settle in the pit of my stomach. "What are you talking about?" Vivienne's lips curled into a malicious smile. "It seems that dear Alara has been, shall we say, less than forthcoming about her educational and professional background. And you, well, your own history is hardly the kind of example one would hope for in a mother-in-law." Alara's face paled, and she gripped the edge of the couch, her knuckles turning white. "What are you saying?" Vivienne's gaze swept over Alara, her expression dripping with disdain. "Simply this, my dear. Unless you and your mother terminate this ridiculous engagement, I will make it my personal mission to destroy you both. Financially, socially, emotionally, you name it. I will stop at nothing to ensure that Liam never marries the likes of you." The room fell silent, save for the rapid pounding of my heart. Vivienne had clearly done her homework, and the implications of her threat were not lost on me. I glanced at Alara, her eyes wide with fear and uncertainty, and I knew in that moment that I would do whatever it took to protect her. "Vivienne," I said, my voice low and steady, "if you think for one moment that I will allow you to terrorize my daughter, you're sorely mistaken. Alara and I will not be bullied, not by you or anyone else, and if you try, I can assure you, you'll regret it." Vivienne's lips curled into a cruel smile. "We'll see about that, Rowena. You have 1 week to make your decision." With that, she rose and swept out of the house, leaving a tangible sense of dread in her wake. As the door closed behind her, Alara turned to me, her face etched with worry. "Mom, what are we going to do?" I pulled her into a tight embrace, my mind racing. "Don't worry, Alara. We'll figure this out. I won't let Vivienne destroy our family." In that moment, a steely determination settled within me. Vivienne had picked the wrong woman to challenge, and I vowed that she would live to regret the day she set her sights on my daughter. The week that followed Vivienne's ultimatum was a whirlwind of anxiety and determination. Alara, bless her heart, tried her best to maintain a sense of normalcy, but I could see the fear and uncertainty etched in the lines of her face. As for me, I was a woman on a mission, driven by a fierce need to protect my daughter and her future. I spent countless hours poring over financial records, making discreet inquiries, and building a case against Vivienne. The woman was clever, I'll give her that, but I was no slouch when it came to uncovering the truth. If she thought she could intimidate me with her veiled threats, she had another thing coming. One evening, as Alara and I were settling in for a quiet night at home, the doorbell rang. I glanced at Alara, my heart pounding in my chest, and she gave me a reassuring nod. I opened the door to find a well-dressed young man standing on the other side. "Good evening, Mrs. Kincaid. My name is Ethan, and I have a message for you from a concerned party." He extended a pristine white envelope, his expression neutral. I took the envelope, eyeing him warily. "A concerned party, you say? And who might that be?" Ethan's lips twitched in the barest hint of a smile. "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information, ma'am, but I can assure you that the contents of that envelope may be of interest to you and your daughter." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the doorstep, the envelope burning a hole in my hand. I closed the door and returned to the living room, where Alara sat perched on the edge of the couch, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and dread. "Who was it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I held up the envelope, my brow furrowed. "I'm not sure, but this person claims to have a message for us." I tore open the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper, my eyes widening as I scanned the contents. "Mom?" Alara's voice was laced with concern. "What does it say?" I swallowed hard, my gaze meeting hers. "It seems that our old friend Vivienne has been rather busy this past week. This document details several of her, shall we say, questionable business dealings." Alara's eyes widened, and she leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. "What kind of dealings?" I shook my head, my lips pressed into a thin line. "Fraud, embezzlement, bribery, the list goes on. It's quite an impressive rap sheet, actually." I paused, my gaze locking with hers. "And it's all here, ready to be exposed." Alara's expression shifted from shock to something akin to determination. "So, what are we waiting for? Let's take this to the authorities and put an end to Vivienne's schemes once and for all." I held up a hand, my expression grave. "Not so fast, my dear. As much as I'd love to see Vivienne's world come crashing down around her, I have a feeling this is just the beginning. No, we need to be strategic about this. Alara's brow furrowed and she opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off with a gentle squeeze of her hand. Think about it, Alara. If we go to the authorities now, Vivienne will know exactly where this information came from. And who do you think she'll come after first? Realization dawned on Alara's face, and she sank back into the couch, her expression troubled. Me. She'll come after me. I nodded, my gaze unwavering. Precisely. And I can't have that. I won't let her hurt you, Alara, not on my watch. Alara's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she reached out, pulling me into a fierce hug. Thank you, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you. I held her close, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. You'll never have to find out, my darling. I'll always be here to protect you, no matter what. As we pulled apart, I felt a familiar, steely determination settle within me. Vivienne had made a grave mistake in targeting my family, and I vowed that she would pay dearly for her arrogance and cruelty. In the days that followed, I found myself in a whirlwind of activity, my mind constantly buzzing with strategies and contingency plans. Vivienne's threats had ignited a fire within me, a fierce determination to protect my daughter and her future at all costs. With the damning evidence in hand, I set out to meticulously build a case against Vivienne, leaving no stone unturned. I pored over financial records, traced shady business dealings, and even enlisted the help of a private investigator to uncover the full extent of Vivienne's misdeeds. As I delved deeper into the web of deceit, a pattern began to emerge, one that led me straight to the heart of Vivienne's empire. It seemed that her husband, Gregor, was unknowingly employed by a subsidiary of my own company, his paycheck signing off on the very same funds that Vivienne had embezzled. The revelation was a stroke of pure luck, but I knew better than to rely on it alone. Vivienne was a crafty adversary, and I couldn't afford to underestimate her. So I continued to gather evidence, meticulously documenting every transaction, every paper trail that could be used to bring her down. In the midst of my clandestine investigations, Alara remained blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb that was her impending nuptials. She continued her work, her passion for her fledgling business shining brighter than ever, and I couldn't help but admire her resilience in the face of Vivienne's relentless harassment. It was during one of Alara's client meetings that I received a distressing call from a concerned employee. Apparently, Vivienne had been making a concerted effort to sabotage Alara's business, spreading malicious rumors and using her influential connections to sway potential clients. I felt a surge of protective rage coursing through my veins, and I knew in that moment that I could no longer sit idly by. Excusing myself from the office, I raced home, my mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios, each more dire than the last. As I burst through the front door, Alara looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. "Mom, what's wrong?" I crossed the room in a few quick strides, enveloping her in a tight hug. "Oh, Alara, I'm so sorry. Vivienne, she's been trying to ruin your business." Alara's eyes widened, and she pulled back, her brow furrowed. "What? How could she do that?" I shook my head, my lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know, but I promise you, I'm going to put a stop to it. She's gone too far this time." Alara opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "No, Alara, I won't let her hurt you like this. It's time I put an end to her games, once and for all." Alara's expression shifted, a determination settling in her gaze. "What are you going to do, Mom?" I squared my shoulders, my eyes narrowing. "I'm going to confront her, Alara. I've been gathering evidence against her for weeks, and I'm not going to let her bully us anymore." Alara nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever you need me to do, I'm here." I pulled her close, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I know, my darling, but I need you to stay out of this for now. Vivienne's already targeted you, and I can't risk her turning her sights on you again." Alara opened her mouth to protest, but I silenced her with a stern look. "Please, Alara, trust me on this. I need you to focus on your business and your life with Liam. I'll handle Vivienne." Alara nodded, her expression resolute. "Okay, Mom, but promise me you'll be careful." I offered her a reassuring smile, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "I promise, Alara, I won't let Vivienne win. Not this time." With that, I turned and headed out the door, my mind racing with the upcoming confrontation. Vivienne had made a grave mistake in crossing me, and I vowed that she would pay dearly for her arrogance and her cruelty. The community center was abuzz with activity, the air thick with the chatter of the well-heeled elite who had gathered for the annual charity gala. As I wove my way through the crowd, my mind was laser-focused on the task at hand, confronting Vivienne and putting an end to her relentless campaign of harassment. I scanned the room, my eyes searching for the unmistakable figure of Vivienne Westbrook. It didn't take long to spot her, holding court in the center of the room, her perfectly coiffed appearance a stark contrast to the warmth and intimacy of the event. Steeling my nerves, I made my way towards her, my steps purposeful and unwavering. As I approached, Vivienne's gaze locked with mine, a hint of unease flickering across her features before she plastered on a saccharine smile. "Rowena, darling, what a lovely surprise," she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I wasn't expecting to see you here tonight." I returned her smile, though mine was decidedly more predatory. "Vivienne, I'm so glad we have a chance to talk. There are a few matters I'd like to discuss with you." Vivienne's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and she gestured towards a secluded alcove. "Why, of course, my dear. Shall we?" As we stepped away from the prying eyes of the crowd, I could feel the tension thickening in the air. Vivienne's expression had hardened, all pretense of civility stripped away. "All right, Rowena, let's have it. What is it that you're so eager to discuss?" Her tone was laced with barely concealed disdain. I took a deep breath, my gaze unwavering. "It's come to my attention that you've been using your considerable influence to sabotage my daughter's business. I must say, I'm rather disappointed in you, Vivienne." Vivienne's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Disappointed, Rowena?" "My dear, I'm simply looking out for my son's best interests. Surely you can understand a mother's desire to protect her child." I felt a surge of anger coursing through my veins, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Protect him from what, Vivienne? From the woman he loves, who happens to be a successful, hard-working entrepreneur? Or is it perhaps your own fragile ego that you're so desperate to preserve?" Vivienne's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the true malice that lurked behind her carefully cultivated facade. "How dare you, Rowena? You have no idea the sacrifices I've made to ensure my family's legacy. Alara may be a charming girl, but she simply doesn't have the pedigree or the refinement to be a Westbrook." I shook my head, my expression a mixture of pity and disgust. "You know, Vivienne, it's truly sad that you place so much value on such superficial things. Alara is a kind, intelligent, and resilient young woman, and she deserves far better than your petty, vindictive games." Vivienne's face flushed with anger, and she leaned in, her voice lowered to a menacing hiss. "You've made a grave mistake in challenging me, Rowena. I will not stand idly by and watch as you taint my family's good name." I held up a hand, silencing her. "Save your threats, Vivienne. I'm not the one you should be worrying about." I paused, my gaze locking with hers. "You see, I've been doing a bit of digging of my own, and I've uncovered some interesting information about your business dealings." Vivienne's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of fear in her expression. "What are you talking about?" I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm talking about embezzlement, fraud, and a whole host of other unsavory activities. And I have the evidence to prove it." Vivienne's lips parted, but no words came out. She stood there, her composure crumbling, as the gravity of my words sank in. "Now, here's the deal, Vivienne," I continued, my voice firm. "You're going to leave my daughter and her fiancé alone. No more harassment, no more sabotage. You're going to keep your distance and let them live their lives in peace. If you don't, I can assure you that the consequences will be unpleasant." Vivienne opened her mouth, her expression a mix of fury and desperation. "You can't do this to me, Rowena. I won't let you." I leveled her with a cold, unwavering stare. "I already have, Vivienne. The choice is yours. Leave us be, or face the consequences of your actions. The ball is in your court." With that, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving a fuming Vivienne in my wake. As I made my way through the crowd, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. Vivienne had been put on notice, and I knew that she would be hard-pressed to ignore the threat that now loomed over her. The days that followed my confrontation with Vivienne were a whirlwind of activity as I worked tirelessly to put my plan into motion. The evidence I had gathered against her was rock solid, and I was determined to use it to bring her down once and for all. I started by discreetly reaching out to my contacts within the local authorities, carefully laying the groundwork for a formal investigation into Vivienne's shady business dealings. It was a delicate dance, one that required a deft touch and a keen understanding of the inner workings of the legal system. As the investigation gained momentum, I began to systematically dismantle Vivienne's carefully constructed empire. I exposed the fraudulent accounting practices that had allowed her to siphon funds from her husband's company, and I uncovered a web of bribery and corruption that stretched from the boardroom to the highest echelons of local government. The revelations were explosive, and it wasn't long before the media caught wind of the scandal. Headlines blared, painting a damning picture of Vivienne's misdeeds, and the public outcry was deafening. It was a stunning fall from grace, one that left the once revered matriarch of the Westbrook family reeling. Meanwhile, Alara remained blissfully unaware of the chaos that was unfolding around her. She continued to focus on her burgeoning business, her eyes shining with a renewed sense of purpose and determination. Liam, too, seemed oblivious to the turmoil, his love for Alara seemingly unshaken by the growing storm. But Vivienne was a different story altogether. As the investigation deepened and the evidence mounted, I could see the cracks beginning to show in her carefully constructed facade. She was a woman on the edge, her carefully curated public persona crumbling around her. It was during one of the final stages of the investigation that Vivienne's world truly began to unravel. I had managed to obtain a copy of the employment records for Gregor's subsidiary, and the revelation was nothing short of explosive. "Gregor, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady as I confronted him in the hallway of the community center. The gala was in full swing, but the air around us felt heavy with tension. Gregor's brow furrowed and he glanced around nervously. "Rowena, what is the meaning of this? I'm in the middle of an important engagement." I held up a hand, silencing him. "This won't take long, Gregor, but I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." Gregor's expression darkened, and he motioned for me to follow him into a secluded alcove. "All right, Rowena, what is it?" I took a deep breath, my gaze unwavering. "Gregor, I'm aware of your involvement with the subsidiary of my company. I know about the embezzlement, the fraud, all of it." Gregor's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "Save it, Gregor. I have the evidence to prove it, and I'm prepared to take this to the authorities if necessary." Gregor's face paled, and he ran a trembling hand through his hair. "Vivienne," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "She did this, didn't she?" I nodded, my expression grim. "Yes, Gregor, and I'm afraid the consequences are about to be severe." Gregor's shoulders slumped, and I could see the weight of the revelations crashing down upon him. "My God, what have I done?" I reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Gregor, there's still time to make this right. But you need to make a choice. Are you going to continue to enable Vivienne's scheming, or are you going to stand up and do the right thing?" Gregor's gaze met mine, and I could see the conflict raging within him. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do I need to do?" I felt a surge of relief wash over me, and I knew in that moment that the tide was about to turn. Vivienne's reign of terror was coming to an end, and I was determined to see it through to the bitter end. The storm had finally come to a head, and as I stood in the grand foyer of the Westbrook estate, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. Vivienne's once impenetrable empire had crumbled around her, the result of her own arrogance and greed. It had been mere days since Gregor's decision to turn against his wife, and the consequences had been swift and unforgiving. The authorities had swooped in, seizing assets and poring over financial records, uncovering an intricate web of deceit that had been years in the making. Vivienne had fought tooth and nail, her vicious temper and sharp tongue unable to sway the relentless tide of evidence that had mounted against her. But in the end, her efforts were in vain, and she found herself facing a litany of charges, from fraud to embezzlement to bribery. As I watched the spectacle unfold, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for Gregor. The man had clearly been manipulated and coerced by his wife, his own sense of self-preservation leading him down a path of moral compromise. But in the end, he had found the courage to do the right thing, and I couldn't help but admire him for it. The sound of the front door slamming shut drew my attention, and I turned to see Liam striding through the foyer, his face etched with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. Our eyes met, and I could see the anguish that he was trying so desperately to conceal. "Rowena," he said, his voice strained. I need to talk to you." I nodded, gesturing towards the sitting room. "Of course, Liam. Please come in." As we settled onto the plush sofa, Liam ran a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed. "I just spoke to my mother. She's been disowned, Rowena. Gregor has filed for divorce, and he's cut her off from the family's assets." I reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "I know, Liam. I'm so sorry you've had to go through this." Liam's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and he shook his head. "I just can't believe it. I mean, I knew my mother was difficult, but I never imagined she would stoop so low, and now everything is falling apart." I squeezed his arm, my expression filled with empathy. "Liam, I know this is a difficult time, but you need to know that you have our unwavering support. Alara and we're here for you, no matter what." Liam's gaze met mine, and I could see the turmoil raging within him. "But what about Alara? How is she handling all of this?" I offered him a reassuring smile. "Alara is strong, Liam. She's been through a lot, but she's weathered the storm, and she loves you more than anything. This won't change that." Liam's shoulders sagged, and he let out a shaky breath. I don't know what to do, Rowena. My mother has always been a part of my life, and now it's all falling apart." I reached out, pulling him into a gentle embrace. "It's okay, Liam. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just know that you have a family here, one that loves you and supports you, no matter what." Liam clung to me, his body shaking with the weight of his emotions. "Thank you, Rowena. I don't know what I'd do without you and Alara." As we pulled apart, I could see a newfound resolve in Liam's gaze. "I'm going to be with Alara, Rowena. No matter what my mother says or does, she's the one I choose to be with." I felt a swell of pride, and I reached out, squeezing his hand. "I know, Liam, and I couldn't be happier for you both." In that moment, I knew that despite the turmoil and heartbreak, Alara and Liam's love would endure. Vivian's reign of terror had come to an end, and in its wake, a new chapter was about to begin. As the dust settled in the wake of Vivian's downfall, a strange sense of calm settled over our household. Alara, bless her heart, had weathered the storm with a resilience that I couldn't help but admire. She had maintained her focus on her business, even as the media frenzy surrounding her mother-in-law-to-be threatened to swallow her whole. Liam, too, had found solace in Alara's unwavering support. The rift between him and his estranged mother had been deep and painful, but with Alara by his side, he seemed to be slowly mending the wounds that Vivian's betrayal had inflicted. I watched the two of them, standing together in the backyard, their hands intertwined as they spoke in hushed tones. Alara's expression was serene, her eyes shining with a quiet strength, while Liam's brow was furrowed, the weight of his recent experiences etched upon his features. As I observed them, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride and protectiveness. They had faced such adversity, and yet their love had only grown stronger. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that the bonds of family and devotion can transcend even the most daunting of obstacles. The sound of the doorbell drew my attention, and I moved to answer it, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me expected to see Vivian, her eyes filled with a desperate plea for forgiveness, but instead I found a somber-faced Gregor standing on the other side. "Rowena," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to speak with you." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, allowing him to enter. "Of course, Gregor. Please come in." As we settled into the living room, an uncomfortable silence settled between us. Gregor's hands were clasped in his lap, his gaze downcast, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the man. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice trembling, "for everything. I know that my actions, or rather my inactions, have caused so much pain and suffering for your family." I reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Gregor, you don't need to apologize. You made the right choice in the end, and that's what matters." Gregor shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No, Rowena, I need to take responsibility for my part in this. I allowed Vivienne's manipulations to blind me to the truth, and in doing so, I betrayed not only my family, but yours as well. I squeezed his arm, my expression softening. Gregor, you're a good man who found himself in an impossible situation. Vivienne is the one who should be bearing the brunt of the consequences, not you. Gregor let out a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging. I've filed for divorce, you know. It's over between Vivienne and I. I nodded, unsurprised by the revelation. I figured as much. You've done the right thing, Gregor. Now it's time to focus on rebuilding your life. Gregor managed a weak smile, his gaze meeting mine. That's just it, Rowena. I don't know where to start. Everything I've known for so long has been turned upside down, and I feel lost. I offered him an encouraging smile. Well then, consider this a fresh start, Gregor, a chance to rediscover who you are without Vivienne's shadow looming over you. Gregor nodded, his expression resolute. You're right. It's time I take back control of my life. And I want to start by making amends to you and your family. I reached out, squeezing his hand. Gregor, you don't owe us anything. What's done is done, and all that matters now is moving forward. Gregor's grip tightened around my hand, and I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes. Even so, Rowena, I want to help in any way that I can. Please, let me do this. I searched his gaze, seeing the sincerity that shone through. With a gentle nod, I acquiesced. All right, Gregor, if you're truly serious about making amends, then I'll gladly accept your help. As Gregor's expression lit up with a renewed sense of purpose, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, out of the ashes of Vivienne's downfall, a new beginning could emerge, one filled with the promise of healing, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The scent of freshly baked cookies wafts through the air as I adjust the perfectly staged throw pillows on the couch. It's the little touches that make all the difference in this business. I step back to admire my handiwork, the open house ready to welcome potential buyers. As I turn to check on the refreshments, I freeze. Walking through the front door, bold as brass, are Ethan and Chloe, my ex-husband and his new wife, the woman he left me for. I plaster on my most professional smile, but inside I'm seething. Ethan smirks as he approaches me. Well, if it isn't Zara, still trying to sell houses, I see. Chloe chimes in, her voice dripping with condescension. I'm surprised you're still in this business, Zara. Ethan told me you were never really cut out for it. I bite my tongue, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. Ethan, Chloe, what a surprise. I didn't expect to see you here. We're looking for a new place, Ethan says, his arm snaking around Chloe's waist. Thought we'd see what you have to offer. The irony isn't lost on me. Years ago, I supported Ethan as he built his law firm, pouring my heart and soul into our marriage, but nothing I did was ever good enough. He grew distant, critical, always finding fault. Determined to contribute and find my own path, I pursued my real estate license. Ethan belittled my efforts at every turn, telling me I was wasting my time. I should have seen the signs then, but I was too blind, too in love. When I discovered his affair with Chloe, his much younger secretary, I confronted him. He denied it, made me feel like I was going crazy. Gaslighting, they call it. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was staring me in the face. The divorce blindsided me. Ethan filed, citing irreconcilable differences. What a joke. He moved in with Chloe before the ink was dry on the papers. I fought tooth and nail for a fair settlement, but he did everything in his power to leave me with nothing. I hit rock bottom, but I refused to stay there. I poured myself into my work, determined to succeed on my own terms. And I did. I became a top-selling agent, started my own agency. I made it my mission to help women like me, those going through tough times, find their dream homes and rebuild their lives. And now, here I am, face to face with my past. Ethan and Chloe, looking to downsize. I can't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at the thought of their financial troubles. I put on my most professional face and guide them through the house, highlighting its features. Ethan makes snide comments under his breath, but I ignore him. Chloe seems distracted, her eyes darting nervously between us. As we wrap up the tour, I can't resist a little dig. I'm sure I can find you something that fits your budget. My business has been thriving, and I have a lot of high-profile clients. I'm sure I can help you out. Ethan's face reddens, and he lashes out. You got lucky, Zara. You're just riding on my coattails. I smile sweetly. Luck has nothing to do with it, Ethan. I worked hard for what I have, and I did it all without you. Chloe shifts uncomfortably, and I can see the cracks in their perfect facade. This is just the beginning. They have no idea what's in store. The memories flood back as I drive home from the open house. Ethan's smug face, Chloe's cutting remarks. They're like a knife twisting in my gut, reminding me of everything I've tried to put behind me. I think back to our marriage, how I supported Ethan through law school, how I believed in him when no one else did. I was there for him, every step of the way, as he built his firm from the ground up. But the more successful he became, the more distant he grew. Nothing I did was ever good enough. He'd come home late, reeking of alcohol and perfume, and I'd pretend not to notice. I'd make his favorite meals, try to engage him in conversation, but he'd just grunt and retreat to his study. I remember the day I decided to get my real estate license. I was tired of feeling like a burden, of relying on Ethan for everything. I wanted to contribute, to have something of my own. When I told Ethan my plans, he laughed in my face. You? A real estate agent? Don't be ridiculous, Zara. You don't have what it takes. His words stung, but I refused to let them deter me. I studied hard, passed my exams, and threw myself into my new career. But Ethan never supported me. He'd belittle my efforts, tell me I was wasting my time. And then came the day I found out about Chloe. I stumbled upon a text message on Ethan's phone, a flirty exchange between him and his secretary. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I confronted him that night, my voice shaking with anger and betrayal. How could you do this to me, Ethan? To us? He looked me straight in the eye and lied. I don't know what you're talking about, Zara. You're being paranoid. There's nothing going on between me and Chloe. I wanted to believe him, desperately wanted it to be true. But deep down, I knew. The late nights at the office, the secret phone calls, the way he looked at her when he thought I wasn't watching. I hired a private investigator, and the truth came out. Photos of Ethan and Chloe, caught in the act. I confronted him again, this time with proof, but he just shrugged and said, I guess you weren't enough for me, Zara. I need someone who understands me, who supports my dreams. The divorce was a nightmare. Ethan fought me every step of the way, trying to leave me with nothing. He even had the audacity to claim that I was the one who had been unfaithful. In the end, I walked away with a fair settlement, but I was broken. I had given Ethan the best years of my life, and he had thrown it all away like it meant nothing. I hit rock bottom, but I refused to stay there. I poured myself into my work, determined to prove Ethan wrong. I would show him that I had what it took, that I could succeed without him. And I did. I became a top-selling agent, started my own agency. I made it my mission to help other women like me, those who had been knocked down but refused to stay there. But seeing Ethan and Chloe today, it all comes rushing back. The pain, the betrayal, the anger. I want to scream, to lash out, to make them feel even a fraction of the hurt they caused me. But I won't. I'm better than that. I'm stronger than that. I've built a life for myself, a life that Ethan can never take away from me. As I pull into my driveway, I take a deep breath and let it out slowly. I won't let them get to me. I won't let them win. I'm Zara, and I'm a survivor. And I'll be damned if I let Ethan and Chloe bring me down again. The divorce papers arrive on a Tuesday. I'm sitting at my desk going over some listings when the receptionist buzzes me. Zara, there's a courier here for you. He says it's urgent. I sign for the envelope, my hands shaking as I tear it open. The words jump out at me. Petition for divorce. Ethan's name, bold and accusing, next to the checked box for irreconcilable differences. I feel like I've been punched in the gut. I knew things were bad, but I never thought he'd go this far. I never thought he'd just give up on us. I try to call him, but he's not answering. I leave message after message, my voice growing more and more desperate. Ethan, please, can we just talk about this? Can we try to work it out? But he's gone. I drive by our house, only to find his car missing and a moving van parked out front. The neighbors give me pitying looks as I sit there, engine idling, tears streaming down my face. I find out later that he moved in with Chloe that same day. He didn't even have the decency to wait until the divorce was final. He just couldn't wait to start his new life with her. The divorce is a nightmare. Ethan fights me tooth and nail, trying to leave me with nothing. He hires the best lawyers, the most ruthless ones, and they tear me apart in court. I remember the day of the final hearing, sitting across from him in that sterile courtroom. He wouldn't even look at me, his eyes fixed on Chloe, who sat smugly in the front row. The judge bangs his gavel, and it's over. I walk away with a settlement, but it feels like a hollow victory. I've lost everything that ever mattered to me. I hit rock bottom after that. I can barely get out of bed in the morning, let alone go to work. I start drinking, just to numb the pain. I push away my friends, my family. I don't want their pity, their platitudes. But then, one day I wake up and realize I can't go on like this. I can't let Ethan win. I can't let him destroy me. I pour myself into my work, determined to succeed. I take on every listing, every client. I work harder than I ever have before, fueled by a fire in my belly that won't be quenched, and slowly, painfully, I start to rebuild my life. I find a new apartment, a cozy little place that's all mine. I make new friends, people who don't know my past, who don't look at me with sympathy in their eyes. I focus on my clients, on helping them find their dream homes. I specialize in working with women going through divorces, women who are starting over just like me. I become their champion, their rock. And as the months turn into years, I start to heal. The pain never goes away, not completely, but it becomes bearable. I learn to live with it, to use it as fuel for my ambition. I become a top-selling agent, start my own agency. I surround myself with people who lift me up, who believe in me. I find a new sense of purpose, a new reason to wake up in the morning. But I never forget what Ethan did to me. I never forget the way he tossed me aside like I was nothing. And I vow that one day I'll make him pay. One day I'll show him exactly what he lost when he chose Chloe over me. One day I'll have my revenge. But for now I focus on my work, on my clients, on building the life I deserve. I am Zara, and I will not be broken. Years pass, and I throw myself into my work with a vengeance. I take on every listing, every challenge. I work longer hours than anyone else, determined to prove myself. And it pays off. My sales numbers skyrocket, and I become the top-selling agent in my office. My clients rave about me, recommending me to their friends and family. I specialize in working with women going through tough times, women who are starting over. I become their confidant, their guide. I help them find not just houses, but homes, places where they can heal and rebuild. One of my clients, a single mother named Sarah, hugs me tightly at her closing. I couldn't have done this without you, Zara, she says, tears in her eyes. You gave me the strength to start over, to believe in myself again. Her words stay with me, fueling my determination. I know what it's like to feel lost, to feel like you've hit rock bottom. But I also know that it's possible to climb out, to build a new life from the ashes of the old. I start my own agency, surrounding myself with a team of driven, compassionate women. We become known as the go-to agency for women in transition, for those who need a little extra support and understanding. My business thrives, and I become a well-respected figure in the community. I'm invited to speak at conferences, to share my story and my expertise. I even start a mentorship program for young women interested in real estate. But through it all, I never forget about Ethan. I never forget the way he betrayed me, the way he left me broken and alone. I keep tabs on him, on his law firm. I hear rumors of unethical practices, of clients who feel cheated and misused. I bide my time, waiting for the right moment to strike. I know that revenge is a dish best served cold, and I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. And then one day, opportunity knocks. I'm hosting an open house for a high-end property, a stunning mansion with sweeping views of the city. I'm in the middle of showcasing the gourmet kitchen when I hear a familiar voice behind me. Zara, I thought that was you. I turn around and there they are, Ethan and Chloe, looking older and more haggard than I remember. Ethan's hair is graying at the temples, and Chloe's face is pinched and sour. Ethan, Chloe, what a surprise. I keep my voice cool, my smile polite. I didn't expect to see you here. We're looking for a new place, Chloe says, her eyes darting around the room. Something a little more affordable. I raise an eyebrow. Oh, having some financial trouble, are we? Ethan scowls, his face reddening. That's none of your business, Zara. We're just exploring our options. I smile, a slow, predatory grin. Of course. Well, as you can see, business is booming for me. I've got high-profile clients from all over the city, and my agency is thriving. I'm sure I could find you something suitable. Chloe looks uncomfortable, but Ethan just glares at me. We don't need your help, Zara. We're doing just fine on our own. I shrug, turning back to the kitchen. Suit yourself, but if you change your mind, you know where to find me. As they walk away, I can't help but feel a thrill of satisfaction. Ethan may have broken me once, but I've rebuilt myself, stronger and better than ever. And now, seeing him struggling, seeing the cracks in his perfect facade, I know that my time for revenge is coming. I may have lost the battle all those years ago, but I'm determined to win the war. And I'll do it on my own terms, with my head held high and my dignity intact. Ethan and Chloe may have destroyed my past, but they have no power over my future. I am Zara, and I am unstoppable. A few days after the open house, I'm sitting in my office when my assistant buzzes me. Zara, there's a Chloe here to see you. She says it's urgent. I feel a flicker of surprise, but I keep my voice steady. Send her in. Chloe walks in, looking nervous and tired. She fidgets with her purse, avoiding my gaze. Zara, I need your help. I lean back in my chair, studying her. Oh, and why would I help you, Chloe? You and Ethan made it pretty clear you wanted nothing to do with me. She takes a deep breath, finally meeting my eyes. Ethan and we're having some financial difficulties. His law firm is struggling, and we're barely making ends meet. We need to sell our house, but we don't know where to start. I can't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at her words. Ethan, the high-powered lawyer, reduced to begging for my help. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. But I keep my face neutral, my voice professional. I see. And you think I'm the right person to help you? Chloe nods, her eyes pleading. You're the best in the business, Zara. Everyone knows that. And I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I'm hoping we can put that behind us, for the sake of our shared history. I want to laugh in her face, to tell her exactly where she can stick her shared history. But I hold my tongue, sensing an opportunity. Very well, I say, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I'll take a look at your property and see what I can do, but I make no promises. Chloe nods eagerly, relief flooding her face. Thank you, Zara. You have no idea how much this means to us. Oh, but I think I do, Chloe. I think I know exactly how much it means to you, and I plan to use that to my full advantage. Over the next few weeks, I work with Ethan and Chloe to get their house ready for sale. I bring in my team of stagers and photographers, transforming the outdated property into a sleek, modern showpiece. But even as I work, I can't help but notice the tension between them. Ethan is short-tempered and irritable, snapping at Chloe over the smallest things. And Chloe seems withdrawn and unhappy, her eyes dull and lifeless. One day, as we're going over some paperwork, Chloe pulls me aside. Zara, can I talk to you for a minute in private? I nod, leading her into a quiet room. She takes a deep breath, her hands shaking. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Ethan, he's not the man I thought he was. I raise an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Oh, what do you mean? Chloe's eyes fill with tears. He's controlling, manipulative. He's been emotionally abusive for years, but I never wanted to admit it. I thought I could change him, but I was wrong. I feel a flicker of sympathy for her, but I push it down. This is the woman who stole my husband, who ruined my life. I can't afford to feel sorry for her. I'm sorry to hear that, Chloe, I say, my voice cool and detached. But what do you expect me to do about it? She looks at me, her eyes pleading. I don't know. I just needed to tell someone. I feel so trapped, so alone. I nod, my mind racing. This is it. This is the opportunity I've been waiting for, the chance to take Ethan down, once and for all. I understand, I say, placing a hand on her shoulder. And I want to help you, Chloe, but you have to be willing to help yourself first. You have to be ready to leave him, to start over. She nods, her face crumpling. I know I do, but I'm scared, Zara. I'm so scared. I squeeze her shoulder, my voice firm and reassuring. I know you are, but you're not alone, Chloe. I'm here for you, and together we'll make sure Ethan gets exactly what he deserves. Over the next few days, I work closely with Ethan and Chloe, showing them potential properties that fit their budget. I'm professional and courteous, but I can't help but notice the growing tension between them. Ethan is short-tempered and impatient, dismissing every house I show them with a sneer. Is this the best you can do, Zara? I thought you were supposed to be the top agent in town. I bite back a retort, keeping my smile firmly in place. I assure you, Ethan, I'm showing you the best properties available in your price range. But if you have something specific in mind, I'm happy to keep looking. Chloe, on the other hand, seems withdrawn and distracted. She barely speaks during our showings, her eyes fixed on the ground. I catch her looking at Ethan with a mixture of fear and resentment, and I know that our conversation from the other day is still weighing heavily on her mind. As we're driving back from yet another unsuccessful showing, Chloe suddenly speaks up from the back seat. Zara, can we talk? Privately? I glance at Ethan, who's scowling out the window. Of course, Chloe. Why don't we grab a coffee? I drop Ethan off at their hotel, promising to meet him later to go over some paperwork. Then I drive Chloe to a quiet cafe, ordering us both a latte. She takes a deep breath, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, Zara, about leaving Ethan, starting over. I nod, keeping my face neutral. And what have you decided? Chloe's eyes fill with tears. I don't know if I can do it. He's all I've known for so long, and I'm scared of what he might do if I try to leave. I reach across the table, taking her hand in mine. Chloe, I know it's scary, but you deserve so much better than this. You deserve to be with someone who treats you with love and respect, not someone who tears you down and controls you. She nods, wiping her eyes with a napkin. I know you're right, but I don't even know where to start. I squeeze her hand, my voice firm and reassuring. Start by talking to a lawyer. Find out what your options are. And in the meantime, document everything. Keep a record of every time Ethan is abusive or controlling. It will help you build a case if you decide to leave. Chloe takes a shaky breath, nodding. Okay, I can do that. I smile at her, feeling a flicker of something that might be hope. And Chloe? Remember, you're not alone. I'm here for you, every step of the way. We finish our coffee and head back to the hotel, where Ethan is waiting impatiently in the lobby. Where have you been? He snaps, glaring at Chloe. I've been waiting for over an hour. I step forward, my voice calm and professional. I apologize, Ethan. Chloe and I had some business to discuss, but I assure you, everything is under control. He scowls at me, his eyes narrowing. It better be. I don't have time for any more of your games, Zara. I smile at him, a slow, predatory grin. Oh, Ethan, you have no idea what kind of game I'm playing. As I walk away, I can feel his eyes boring into my back, but I don't look back. I have work to do. Over the next few weeks, I help Chloe gather evidence of Ethan's abuse. She starts keeping a journal, documenting every cruel word, every controlling action. She takes photos of the bruises on her arms, the holes he's punched in the walls, and all the while, I'm building my own case against him. I reach out to some of his former clients, the ones who felt cheated and misused. I gather evidence of his unethical practices, his shady dealings. I know that the time is coming. The time to take Ethan down once and for all, and when that day comes, I'll be ready. Ready to watch him fall, ready to see the look on his face when he realizes that he's finally met his match. In Zara, the woman he once destroyed, the woman who rose from the ashes, stronger and more powerful than ever before, the woman who will be his ultimate downfall. The day of reckoning arrives sooner than I expected. I'm in my office going over some paperwork when my phone rings. It's Chloe, and she's hysterical. Zara, please, you have to help me. Ethan, he found out about the lawyer. He's furious. He's threatening to hurt me, to ruin me. I'm on my feet in an instant, grabbing my keys and my bag. Chloe, listen to me. Get out of there now. Go somewhere safe. I'll take care of Ethan. I can hear her sobbing on the other end of the line. Okay, I'll go to my sister's place. But Zara, please be careful. He's not in his right mind. I hang up the phone, my heart racing. I know what I have to do. I drive to Ethan's office, my mind churning with possibilities. I know I have to be smart about this, have to play my cards just right. I walk into his office without knocking, my head held high. He looks up from his desk, his face twisting with rage. What the hell are you doing here, Zara? I smile at him, a cold, calculating smile. I think you know exactly why I'm here, Ethan. I know what you've been doing to Chloe. I know about the abuse, the manipulation. He stands up, his fists clenched at his sides. You don't know anything, Zara. You're just a bitter, jealous woman who can't let go of the past. I laugh, a harsh, brittle sound. "Oh, Ethan, you have no idea what I'm capable of. I've been watching you, gathering evidence. I know about your unethical practices, your shady dealings. I have enough to ruin you, to destroy everything you've ever worked for." His face pales, and I can see the fear in his eyes. "You're bluffing. You don't have anything on me." I reach into my bag, pulling out a thick folder. "Oh, but I do, Ethan. I have testimonies from your former clients, the ones you cheated and lied to. I have financial records showing your embezzlement, your fraud. I have photos of Chloe's bruises, the ones you gave her when you lost your temper." I toss the folder onto his desk, watching as he scrambles to pick it up. "It's over, Ethan. You're finished. And if you ever come near Chloe again, if you ever lay a hand on her, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life behind bars." He looks up at me, his face contorted with rage and fear. "You can't do this, Zara. You can't destroy me." I lean in close, my voice a low, menacing whisper. "Watch me." I turn to walk away, but he grabs my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "You'll pay for this, Zara. I'll make sure of it." I wrench my arm away, my eyes blazing with fury. "No, Ethan, you're the one who's going to pay. For everything you've done to me, to Chloe, to all the people you've hurt along the way. You're going to pay, and I'm going to be the one to make sure of it." I walk out of his office, my heart pounding in my chest. I know that this is just the beginning, that there will be a long, difficult road ahead. But I also know that I'm ready for it, ready to fight for what's right, ready to take back the power that Ethan stole from me all those years ago. I get in my car and drive to Chloe's sister's place, my mind racing with possibilities. I know that I have to be there for her, have to help her through this difficult time. But I also know that I have to be strong, have to be the one to lead the charge. Because this is my fight, too. This is my chance to make things right, to get the revenge I've been dreaming of for so long. And I won't rest until Ethan is brought to justice, until he's made to pay for all the pain and suffering he's caused. I am Zara, and I am a force to be reckoned with, and heaven help anyone who tries to stand in my way. The fallout from my confrontation with Ethan is swift and brutal. Within days, the news of his unethical practices and abusive behavior is splashed across every newspaper and news site in the city. His law firm crumbles, clients fleeing in droves. His partners distance themselves, desperate to save their own reputations. And Ethan himself is disgraced, his name becoming synonymous with corruption and deceit. I watch it all unfold with a grim sense of satisfaction, knowing that I played a part in his downfall. But I also know that my work is far from over. Chloe files for divorce, and I help her find a new place to live, a small but cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood. She's scared and overwhelmed, but I remind her that she's not alone, that she has people who care about her and want to help. We spend long hours talking, sharing our stories and our pain. I tell her about my own divorce, about how Ethan nearly destroyed me, but how I found the strength to rebuild my life. And she tells me about the years of abuse and manipulation, the constant fear and self-doubt. Together, we start to heal, to find a new sense of purpose and hope. Chloe enrolls in therapy, starts taking classes to finish her degree, and I throw myself into my work, determined to make a difference in the lives of other women who have been through similar struggles. Months pass, and life starts to settle into a new normal. Ethan is a distant memory, a cautionary tale of what happens when power and ego go unchecked. But then one day, I receive a phone call that changes everything. It's Ethan, and he's begging for my help. "Zara, please," he says, his voice desperate and broken. I know I have no right to ask, but I don't know where else to turn. I'm losing everything, my career, my reputation, my freedom. I need your help. For a moment, I'm tempted to hang up, to leave him to suffer the consequences of his actions. But then I remember something my therapist once told me about the power of forgiveness, about how holding on to anger and resentment only hurts ourselves in the end. So I take a deep breath, and I make a decision that surprises even me. "Okay, Ethan, I'll help you, but not for you, for me, because I need to let go of the past, to move on with my life." We meet at a coffee shop, and I listen as he pours out his heart, telling me about his regrets, his fears, his desperate desire to make things right. And as I listen, I feel something shift inside me, a sense of closure and release. I offer him some advice, some resources for getting help and making amends. And then I stand up to leave, feeling lighter than I have in years. "Thank you, Zara," he says, his eyes filled with tears. "I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful for it nonetheless." I nod, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "Take care of yourself, Ethan. And remember, it's never too late to start over." As I walk out of the coffee shop, I feel a sense of peace wash over me. I know that I'll never forget the pain and trauma of my past, but I also know that I've found a way to move forward, to build a new life based on strength, resilience, and hope. I think back to the woman I was all those years ago, the one who was broken and lost, who thought she'd never find her way out of the darkness. And I feel a surge of pride and gratitude for how far I've come, for the person I've become. I am Zara, a survivor, a fighter, a woman who has been through hell and back and come out stronger on the other side. And I know that no matter what challenges life throws my way, I have the courage and the determination to face them head on, to keep moving forward, one step at a time. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at Owen's phone, the bright screen searing the horrific truth into my mind. The messages were unmistakable, sweet nothings and explicit details that could only be meant for one person, his lover. "Hey babe, can't wait to take you out tonight. I've got a surprise planned." I felt the blood drain from my face as reality crashed down upon me. My husband, my partner of 12 years, was having an affair. The phone slipped from my trembling hands as a tidal wave of emotions threatened to drown me. Shock, anger, devastation. I'm not sure how long I sat there, numb and motionless, before the sound of Nathan's laughter from the backyard jarred me back to the present. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I willed my racing thoughts into focus. I couldn't confront Owen, not yet. This required a more calculated response. Retrieving his phone, I quickly deleted the damning thread, removing any trace of my discovery. No, Owen would not get off that easily. If he thought he could betray me and simply walk away, he was gravely mistaken. My mind whirred as the initial panic gave way to cold determination. I knew what I had to do. First, I needed evidence, concrete proof to dismantle every lie he would inevitably try to spin. Second, I required a plan to secure mine and Nathan's future, protecting us from the fallout of his reprehensible actions. I dialed the only person I could trust with such a weight. "Ella? It's me. We need to talk." By the time Owen returned home that evening, my game face was firmly in place. I smiled and played the doting wife, all while mentally cataloging his every move, his every casual lie. He would soon learn that betrayal came at a cost, and I intended to make him pay dearly. Over the next few days, I kept my ears priced for any information that could aid my cause, maintaining a cool front despite the storm of fury raging within. Scouring his emails, texts, and any other electronic trails, I slowly pieced together the sordid details of his affair, my hatred for this Jenna intensifying with every revelation. I also began meticulously documenting his indiscretions, ensuring I left no stone unturned. Legal counsel, separate bank accounts, updated beneficiaries, no precaution was too small in securing a future for Nathan and myself, free from Owen's corrosive influence. With Ella's assistance, I bided my time, allowing Owen to slip further into the web of his own lies as his actions grew more brazen. All the while, I steadily constructed an impenetrable case against him, turning his selfish misdeeds against him. One way or another, he would atone for his sins. Soon, the veil of deceit would be lifted, and only then would Owen comprehend the true consequences of betraying the person who knew him best. The day of reckoning was coming, and I would be ready. Over the next few weeks, I worked methodically to reshape our routines, gradually removing any ties that could impede a clean break from Owen. Little by little, I redirected finances into a secure account, paid down joint debts, and revised legal documents. I even switched Nathan to a new school, one closer to Ella's house, just in case. Owen, the oblivious fool, remained utterly clueless to the approaching storm. His arrogance left an increasingly blatant trail of evidence. Received gifts inexplicably appearing around the house, furtive phone calls at all hours, shady rendezvous disguised as working late. I diligently catalogued every infraction, every despicable transgression. One afternoon, I caught him in the act, hunched over his laptop, having what he thought was a private video call. You'll never guess what I have planned for this weekend, baby." He purred in that sickly sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "A cozy little bed and breakfast up in the mountains, just you and me." I pressed record on my phone, allowing his tawdry words to permanently etch his deceit before clearing my throat loudly. Owen startled, panic flashing across his face as he scrambled to minimize the window. Too late, I had bore witness to the truth yet again. "Oh, hey, Han." He feigned an innocent smile. "Just a work call. You know how it is." Rather than confront his pathetic lie, I simply quirked an eyebrow and strolled away, anger simmering beneath my calm veneer. Let him leave the increasingly transparent trail. It would only further damn him when I deployed my reckoning. A new fire lit within me as I doubled down on my efforts. I knew the law would side with the wronged spouse, especially with the cache of evidence I had diligently compiled, but it never hurt to stock more ammunition. With Ella's help, I left no stone unturned, drilling into Owen's email accounts, financial records, anywhere even the faintest trace of impropriety may lurk. And lurk it did. Jenna's name appeared again and again, a scarlet A woven through loan applications, withdrawals, even several Negley employees' reports that Ella managed to unearth. Piece by piece, I unraveled the tapestry of lies he so carefully attempted to shroud, revealing their affair for the umbrella of selfish deception it truly was. Meanwhile, Owen's behavior at home grew more erratic, more careless. Perhaps sensing the calm before the storm, he seemed determined to cram in as much debauchery as possible. I lost count of the evenings he stumbled in late, reeking of that trashy perfume, or the hushed phone calls held in parked cars. It was almost insultingly blatant. Through it all, I maintained a veneer of plausible deniability, tenderly caring for Nathan while shrouding my intentions behind a facade of wifely naivety. Let Owen openly frolic with his mistress. It would only make the sting of his consequence more brutal and well-deserved. Part of me couldn't wait to obliterate the life he thought he knew, to crush every bit of shameless arrogance that allowed him to so brazenly spit in the face of our vows. Soon the predator would become the prey, his infidelity dissected and upended for all to see the ugly, selfish core lurking underneath. I knew the road ahead would be painful, that curveballs and complications surely loomed just out of sight. But I refused to go down as the meek, jilted wife weeping from the sidelines. No, Owen's betrayal required a firmer hand, and I would be the one to deliver his penance with surgical, unwavering precision. Licking my wounds in private, I steadied my nerves and hardened my resolve. Judgment awaited, and I would be its ultimate arbiter. As the weeks ticked by, more layers of Owen's deception began to unspool. Diving into our financial records, I discovered he had been steadily siphoning funds from our joint accounts into a separate, hidden stash. Thousands of dollars, drained to bankroll his escapes with that vile woman. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. Not only was he betraying my trust in the most unconscionable way, but he was robbing from our family's future, from Nathan's potential inheritance, to fund his deplorable indulgences. I felt utterly violated. Thankfully, I had kept meticulous documentation of every fishy transaction, every bit of evidence that could be leveraged against him. With Ella's guidance, I began quietly setting up my own off-the-books account, diverting what I could salvage to ensure a stable financial future for Nathan and myself, independent of Owen's selfishness. Ironic, I thought bitterly, that he would inadvertently teach me such an invaluable lesson about contingency planning. As if his monetary depravity despicable enough, I soon uncovered an even more gut-wrenching layer of Owen's betrayal. Amidst my impassive surveillance of his communications, I came across a galling string of messages between him and Jenna, each more repulsive than the last. "You know this can't go on forever, right?" Her artificially sweet words practically oozed through the screen. "If you ever want us to have a real future, you need to do the right thing and leave that family of yours behind." My heart plummeted into my stomach as I absorbed the full extent of her arrogant, cold-blooded manipulation. So that was her insidious game. She hadn't just set her predatory sights on snagging Owen for a fleeting dalliance, but had been systematically working to obliterate our entire lives. The worst part was, his responses seemed to be tacitly encouraging her suggestions. In that moment, I was gripped by an overwhelming protectiveness over Nathan. I refused to allow that shriveled snake of a woman to slither her way into destroying the sanctity of his childhood, of the life and values I had so lovingly nurtured. If she wanted a battle, she had just initiated a war she could never hope to win. I redoubled my efforts, drilling down on every last intersection of their sordid involvement. Deleted messages, calendar invites, receipts, all betraying a torrid breadcrumb trail deliberately hidden in plain sight, as though Owen reveled in parading his indiscretions behind my back. With Ella's assistance, I began compiling it all into an ironclad damning dossier, one that would ensure I emerged victorious. Meanwhile, as Owen's duplicity intensified, so did my efforts to lovingly insulate Nathan from the turmoil lurking under our roof. We spent quality time together each day, baking, doing arts and crafts, lavishing in the simplicities of the mother-son bond. Deep down, I drew strength from his innocence, from the bright future I was determined to preserve on his behalf. "Mom, can we go camping this summer?" Nathan asked one afternoon, all smiles and unbridled hope. "You, me and Dad?" My heart clenched at the thought of Owen tainting such a special tradition with his perverse dishonesty. Forcing a reassuring smile, I pulled my sweet boy close. "Of course we can, baby," I murmured into his hair. "Maybe somewhere extra special, just you and me." Owen couldn't be allowed to tarnish Nathan's horizons any longer. As his transgressions piled up, so did the fortifications around the family he had shattered beyond repair. Guided by Ella's pragmatism and my own unflappable discipline, I arised the art of sustainable vengeance, quietly assembling the battle plan that would neutralize every last threat he posed. Our future security was nearing weight off the deceptive life he had so recklessly constructed. Once the dust settled, Nathan and I would emerge vibrant and victorious, utterly insulated from the toxicity of Owen's rebounding misery. Soon, all would be laid bare, and that wretched mistress of his would learn the steep price for ruining the sanctity of my family. With my defenses solidifying, it was time to take the offensive. I knew divorce proceedings would be inevitable, so I began consulting with a ferocious bulldog of a lawyer that Ella recommended. Sitting across from her imposing desk, I methodically laid out the comprehensive paper trail, documenting every last one of Owen's indiscretions. "I want to pursue an at-fault divorce on grounds of adultery," I stated flatly. "He needs to be held fully accountable." The lawyer's eyes widened as she examined the mountain of evidence, hard numbers, screenshots, incriminating images. Finally, she let out a low whistle of impressed disbelief. "With a case file like this, he won't know what hit him," she stated grimly. "We'll bleed him dry." Her cold calculation was strangely reassuring. For too long, I had been at the mercy of Owen's betrayal. Now I would be the one dictating his misery. Meanwhile, Ella had been working her own angles to demolish the worm's life on a professional level. Through her investigative prowess, she uncovered an insidious pattern surrounding his mistress, a systematic seduction of married colleagues from the bottom rungs all the way to upper management. Jenna wasn't just a callous homewrecker, she was a calculating workplace huntress. Armed with undeniable proof of her penchant for unscrupulous affairs, Ella began feeding anonymous tips to her employer's human resources department. Suddenly, the veneer of professionalism that Jenna had so carefully maintained began to disintegrate before her. I could only imagine the fear that started lacing Owen's messages to his mistress as gathering storm clouds of scrutiny began closing in on their indiscretion. Would he finally start to feel the shred of anxiety, the paralyzing uncertainty that I had been forced to endure for months? How delicious it would be to watch his world slowly implode while remaining utterly powerless to undo his own vile undoing. I refused to simply sit back and gloat, however. With the lawyer's guidance, I pressed forward in surgically separating myself from any legal or financial liability stemming from Owen's recklessness. Name was to be stripped from property titles, accounts relisted under just my name, every entanglement cauterized with precise intention. Like a gifted angler, I indelicately removed every barb and hook he had carelessly strewn across my life, one squirming tug at a time. "Don't leave any strings dangling," the lawyer warned. "He'll try desperately to bleed you dry as leverage, so cut off all potential sources." I just smirked back at her, utterly undaunted. That foolish man had already revealed the boundless depths of his depravity, his staggering capacity for selfishness and indulgent stupidity. Did he really think I would blink at his pathetic intimidation tactics now? Oh, how exquisite his underestimation would be. Every day, it seemed, unearthed a new layer of Owen's perfidy for me to coldly dismantle. The shady real estate holdings, mail-order dalliances, messy digital footprint, all irreversibly preserved as damning exhibits in his upcoming humiliation. With each dossier I compiled, each revelation of deceit and betrayal, my appetite for retribution grew insatiably ravenous. He simply had no idea what sort of Pyrrhic victory he had unleashed upon himself. Fool that he was, he could never fathom the depths of my capacity for determination or discipline. Where he remained pathetically encapsulated by the incessant neediness of his cowardly id, I was rapidly evolving into an unstoppable force of nature, a consummate, merciless juggernaut of wrath. I would become the arbiter through which all of his despicable transgressions would finally and irrevocably be judged. As Owen remained blessedly clueless to the swirling vortex of exposure rapidly encircling him, I continued preparing the pieces for our fateful reckoning with practiced calculation. Let him wallow obliviously in his cesspool of lust and faithlessness a while longer. The phantom freedom he was deludedly indulging would prove all the more suffocating once I fully seized the reins of his torment. His future belonged to me now, as much as he had willfully orphaned himself from mine, and the path ahead for him was looking increasingly unavoidably bleak. With each passing week, the tsunami of Owen's consequence gathered more unstoppable momentum. The HR complaints against him and his mistress had bloomed into a full-fledged corporate scandal, with whispers and dark looks trailing their every move through the office halls. "I can't believe we've been working alongside those kinds of people," I overheard a coworker mutter in hushed tones. "It's just sordid." Owen may have remained oblivious to the rapidly disintegrating ground beneath his feet, but there was no masking Jenna's increasingly frantic demeanor. I watched with perverse satisfaction as the weight of her self-inflicted ruin seemed to physically age her before my eyes. "This is spiraling out of control," her text to Owen became increasingly shrill. "We need to get ahead of this now." "Relax, babe. It's just office gossip," he attempted to soothe her, the smug dismissiveness in his words stoking my hatred. "I'll smooth everything over. Just keep your head down." The arrogant delusion was almost pitiable. Owen remained utterly blind, like an obliviously cheery denizen wandering into the heart of a steadily encroaching minefield. Any day now, his world would detonate in an apocalyptic deluge, decades of deceit and selfishness finally withering under their own morally indefensible weight. While he buried his head in the sand, I continued systematically dismantling every last lifeline that could possibly serve to buoy his retreat. One by one, through calculated rised planning and Ella's expert assistance, the few friends or family members who may have provided shelter from the coming storm found themselves gradually, neutrally estranged. Like a twisted, violent magic trick, I made his entire world silently dematerialize around him, all without lifting a finger towards direct confrontation. Having thoroughly excised Owen's cancerous influence from my life, I turned to focusing on preparing Nathan for the seismic shifts ahead. Though still painfully unaware of the grotesque betrayal unfolding around him, my son had become increasingly unsettled by the underlying tensions now frayed our once idyllic home life. Evening meals were spent shooting me questioning looks while his father hurriedly choked down food. Outings felt increasingly strained and awkward, like wool being pulled over our eyes. "Is everything okay with Dad?" Nathan finally asked one night as I tucked him in, his brow furrowed with childhood worry. "He seems different lately." Steadying myself, I stroked his soft cheek and offered my most reassuring smile. "Everything's just fine, baby," I soothed, surprised at my own believability. "Grown-ups go through some changes sometimes, that's all, but you'll always have me, no matter what." My son seemed to accept the placation, snuggling deeper into his blankets with a relieved nod, but his words cemented my determination to steel him for the unavoidable turbulence that loomed ahead. For too long, Owen had been eroding the steadfast center I had fought to keep our nuclear family intact and happy. It was finally time to excise that malignancy. Over the following days, I took great care to lavish Nathan with affection and quality time, striving to create joyful memories that could fortify him through the trials ahead. We went for nature walks, visited museums, rewatched all his favorite movies nestled on the couch, anything to insulate him in a warm domesticity wholly segregated from his father's self-inflicted turmoil. All the while, I could practically feel the crosshairs of impending confrontation slowly fixing themselves on Owen's oblivious form. Like the peak of a terrifying roller coaster's first dip, we were nearly suspended at the calm before the plunging maelstrom, the decisive reckoning which he had unconscionably forced to this point. I had assembled an overwhelmingly damning dossier of evidence, stripping away every layer of his depravity through documentation and cold pragmatism. Restraining orders, asset protections, childcare provisions. Nothing was left unfortified for the coming siege of his unleashed mania. All that remained was to deftly lure Owen into the kill zone, then riddle him with the merciless barrage of justice he had brought up-rakening upon himself. Scattered amidst the zeal of my preparations, I caught flashes of the woman I had once been, tempted to abandon this increasingly dark path out of some withering self-preservation. But they never lasted. My identity was permanently arc-welded to this white-hot meta-wingedity and finality of purpose. There could be no equivocation, no half-measures remaining, only a sudden, blinding dawn terminating this wretched season of deception, paving the way for the hard-won renaissance awaiting for Nathan and myself. Owen's day of judgment had nearly arrived, and I was ready. With the final pieces locked into place, I summoned Owen home for our inevitable reckoning, a terse text demanding his presence. He likely assumed I wanted to rehash marriage counseling or some other fruitless attempt at reconciliation. Little did he know I had long abandoned any notion of preserving our lawfully wedded privation. When he finally sauntered through the door, I was seated stoically in the living room, a thick manila folder containing his compendium of sins resting coolly on the coffee table before me. As instructed, Nathan was safely ensconced at Ella's for the evening. This fallout would be far too toxic for young eyes to witness. "Hey, hon, you wanted to see me?" Owen's voice held a twinge of confusion as he made his way towards me, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. With a steely glare, I slid the dossier across the table towards his approaching form. "You might want to take a look at this first." The instant his fingers opened the folder, dread instantly washed over his features, panic seizing his body. For several torturous moments, my husband rifled through the damning evidence with shaking hands, incriminating photos, blasphemous texts, philanthropist money trails. Every dirty secret, every web of adulterous malfeasance I had so meticulously compiled over these agonizing months, all finally laid bare before his ashen face. "Lila," he finally sputtered, eyes brimming with pathetic, unshed tears. "I don't know what to say." "Don't bother," I coldly interjected, unmoved by his woebegone theatrics. "Your actions have spoken volumes already. I'm done playing pretend, done swallowing the lies. Our marriage is over." The words seemed to slap him in the face, his jaw going slack with dismay. Good, let him marinate in the consequences of his selfish treachery for once. "But you can't be serious," Owen blubbered in disbelief. "After everything we've been through, we can work this out. I know we can. Just tell me what you need, Lila. I'll do anything." I gave a derisive snort at the absurdity of his blustering, utterly unmoved by his sniveling pleas. "You've already shown me exactly what you're willing to do. Lie, cheat, steal, utterly betray the very sanctity of our vows without a single shred of remorse, all to indulge your tawdry fling with that viper of a woman." My words hung heavy in the air, both of us fully aware that I was referring to his mistress, Jenna. His momentary hesitation said it all. Pathetically, his first instinct had been to attempt disassociation from her, the cowardly worm. "That's over. I swear," he backpedaled, desperation mounting. "Completely, totally finished. This was all a massive mistake, you have to know that." "A mistake?" My voice was a razor at his throat. "You don't get to play revisionist with your ugly, drawn-out patterns of infidelity and depravity, Owen. You made your bed, woven tightly with deceit and moral atrocity. Now you get to lie in it." On cue, punctuating the finality of my statement, the front door creaked open and my lawyer entered, manila folders clutched in her manicured grasp. She stalked over and deposited them squarely on the table next to the teetering stacks of Owen's documented sins. Mr. Hendricks, I'd suggest carefully reviewing and signing where indicated, she intoned professionally. Mrs. Hendricks has secured a very thorough judgment on your behavior. Owen gaped like a fish, frantically flipping through the sheafs of legalese as tears began to openly flow down his crumbling face. Every protection, every contingency crafted during my Praguing exit strategy now fell ruinously into place around his buckling form. It was beautiful, utterly vindicating justice. This can't be happening, he whispered numbly, Pelagian at the sheer immensity of his forfeiture. Finances, property, probably even custody if I pressed based on his philandering rap sheet. His shattered eyes finally lifted to meet my own, perhaps for the first time in years, truly seeing the remorseless diamond-plated version of the woman he had so carelessly betrayed. In that moment, I allowed every last acrid plume of rage and disgust I felt towards him to bore into his shrinking soul. Start getting used to your new reality, Owen, I spoke softly, each word dripping avec menace. This is the bed you've made, and I'm just getting started in returning that favor. In the days following my explosive confrontation with Owen, a strange, almost giddy calm settled over me. As I watched him desperately attempt to untangle the legal straitjacket I had so tightly bound him in, I felt utterly at peace, like a skilled surgeon having cleanly excised a malignant toxicity. This is outrageous, he railed to my lawyer during one meeting, motioning wildly at the divorce terms. You can't just take everything. What about my career? What am I supposed to do? The shark-eyed attorney barely batted an eye. Frankly, Mr. Hendricks, you should count yourself lucky you haven't been charged with criminal misconduct, given the evidence. I'd suggest complying and avoiding any unpleasant escalations. Unable to restrain my satisfaction, I allowed a faint smirk to crease my lips as the impotent bluster drained from Owen's face. I'd hand-picked this aggressive legal Rottweiler for her reputation in devouring entitled adulterers. Let him choke on the bitter taste of his abject humiliation for once. While he flailed and floundered in a desperate bid for basic traction, I focused my energies on more positive pursuits, namely ensuring a smooth transition for Nathan. With gentle age-appropriate conversations, I steadily ushered him through the realities of our new reality, careful to insulate him from any unnecessary toxicity. Daddy has made some grown-up mistakes, I explained carefully, cradling my son close. Ones that mean we won't be living together as a family anymore. But you'll always have me, and I'll always keep you safe and happy. I promise. To his immense credit, Nathan seemed to accept the situation with surprising grace and resilience. Perhaps the underlying frictions in our home had been more transparent than I'd hoped. In any case, with the cancerous influence of Owen's toxicity expunged, I could already sense my son's lightening spirit, unshackled from the poisoned air he had been unwittingly inhaling for far too long. As for Owen, his pathetic attempts at reconciliation and mercy fell on deafened ears. I caught glimpses of his mewling voicemails, increasingly anguished texts pleading to meet, reeking of desperation, but I simply forwarded them to my lawyer, refusing to indulge his predictable histrionics for even a moment. He had chosen to selfishly discard any goodwill or decency between us. Now he could drown in the withering consequences. On the work front, Owen's life continued its inexorable implosion as his seamy conduct rapidly became laughingstock of the office. I almost pitied the wretch when Ella shared footage of him being perp-walked out of his workplace, cardboard box overflowing with personal items and millennial career relics clutched limply to his chest. Jenna could be seen slinking off in the background in a paroxysm of self-inflicted embarrassment. "You're finally getting what you deserve," Ella told me with a satisfied nod. "Both of you miserable snakes." I merely shrugged, suddenly self-conscious of the depth of my friend's loyalty. Truthfully, I held no grudge against Jenna anymore. Her petty, shriveled existence had already transformed into its own searing punishment, her prospects permanently cauterized by the wildfire of scandal she helped spark in her singular lust and weakness. Owen, however, he would never escape the full, crippling weight of my disdain and fury. Not until his dying day, spent groveling through the rubble of all he had destroyed through his arrogance and weakness. I would gleefully ensure it. With each passing milestone, the house transferred to my name, Owen's unceremonious loss of custody and privileges, his reputation left a smoldering crater of scandal. The vice around his flailing existence only tightened. The man I had once loved, the father of my precious child, had willfully transformed into an amoral, lust-addled parasite. This systematic unraveling was the only poetic penance he had left himself susceptible to, and I was the merciless architect, a keeper of his regenerating torment. My only regret through the entire process, if you could call it that, was my failure to capture the look on Owen's face as the final divorce papers were shoved across the table for his signature. The abject, hopeless capitulation. I committed that image to memory with savage intensity, a permanent brand searing the depth of his unforgivable transgressions into my very soul. If he had any delusions of earning leniency or a shoulder to cry on, they were emphatically snuffed in that moment. I stood impassive, muscles taut and unyielding as the granite monolith I had become, unmoved by his pitiful, shuddering pleas. After all, he had made this bed, and he would lie in it forever. As the ashes of our immolated relationship cooled and scattered to the winds, I turned to embrace my radiant future with renewed determination. Nathan and I would not merely endure in the wake of Owen's ruination. We would flourish, heroically emboldened by the sheer ferocity of my love. The next chapter, wholly devoid of my cancerous husband's toxic influence, beckoned brilliantly. With the divorce finalized and Owen permanently exiled from our lives, an incredible weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe easy again, unburdened by his insidious deception and selfishness poisoning the very air around me. Gone were the furtive glances over my shoulder, the gnawing doubts needling my subconscious. The pathological menace that was my former husband had been banished. In his place, stretching out ahead of Nathan and I, shone the inviting path of a fresh start, a life finally free from that emotional malignancy. My son, in particular, seemed to blossom in the weeks after Owen's departure. With his father's erratic, deflating presence no longer clouding our home, Nathan emerged a sunny, vibrant version of himself that I had feared was being slowly smothered. He laughed more, played with an unbridled joy and innocence, and seemed to walk taller, almost as if subconsciously relieved to be rid of an unseen burden. I knew he still harbored questions, childlike confusion about the intricacies of why Dad was no longer around. But I allowed those doubts to dissipate naturally through the simple pleasures of being present as his single, doting parent. Our bond deepened in ways I hadn't realized were possible, a nearness forged through the shared triumph over adversity. In many ways, I found myself rediscovering my own identity as well, reclaiming the woman I had been before the toxicity of Owen's influence took insidious hold. Gone were the feeble insecurities he had so skillfully preyed upon, replaced by an almost feral self-reliance, an unwavering confidence in my ability to nurture and provide unaided. Of course, I would be lying if I didn't admit to still harboring a vicious streak of resentment towards my ex-husband. Try as I might, I couldn't seem to fully excise him from my thoughts, my perceptions of the world now forever being filtered through the lens of his ultimate betrayal. Mundane tasks like checking the mailbox or reviewing finances seemed to dredge up visceral flashes of that sickening sense of violation and embarrassment upon realizing the full extent of his cheating and squandering. But I refused to allow those ugly feelings to corrupt the fresh, vibrant horizons stretching out before Nathan and I. If anything, they reminded me of the revitalizing decision I had made to sever that dead weight and provided Flint's striking motivation to diligently maintain our freedom lest we stumble into a backslide. As for my actual encounters with Owen, well, they were bitterly limited to polite but emotionally distanced co-parenting obligations. I could sense his desperate yearning for any shred of warmth or nostalgic connection during the frequent custody handoffs, his eyes silently pleading for an olive branch or moment of levity he had long forfeited any right to. But I had meant what I said, that bridge had been napalmed to cinders, nothing remaining to rehabilitate. After the unspeakable transgressions and indignities he had subjected me to so callously, he would forever be immediately dead to me outside of the most rudimentary procedural dealings. No amount of sniveling or feigned remorse could ever hope to erase the scars he had inflicted. So while Owen was left to wallow in the wreckage of his selfish debauchery, A ruined career, an ostracized social life, even restraining orders keeping him at a safe distance from me and his former workplace paramour, my focus remained squarely ahead on forging the brilliant futures we had so narrowly reclaimed from his morass of lies. With Ella's support and encouragement, I slowly let down my guard, began embracing all the wonderful possibilities unfurling in this new dawn of independence. One key step was resurrecting my long-ignored graphic design passion into a full-fledged career, pooling my settlements into launching a thriving online business that allowed me the perfect work-life balance as a newly minted single mother. It was deeply validating, watching my creative hunches blossom into success while remaining ever-present for Nathan's needs. Almost as if the universe itself was rewarding my perseverance and sacrifice, gently restoring the dignity that Owen had so malignantly leached away. From there, it was almost frighteningly easy to let the light back into our lives, our household brimming with renewed vitality. I founded a women's support group to empower other divorcees who had faced similar trauma. We took vacations abroad, soaking in new cultures and perspectives as antidotes to Owen's provincialism. By all metrics, we were genuinely, effervescently happy in ways that had eluded us throughout that entire dark chapter score of marital imprisonment. Looking back, it was hard to believe there had been a time when the pall of Owen's toxicity had settled so insidiously over us all. My memories of that miserably wasted purgatory already felt like dissolving fever dreams, ephemeral delusions overwhelmed and exorcised by the blinding truth that had set us free. Nathan and I had been given an almost implausible second chance at living our lives to their fullest potentials, one I vowed never to squander in exchange for mere complacency or jadedness ever again. My son would grow up seeing the true depth of a matriarch's inner steel, and the infinite power that comes from making the impossible choice to stand upright and walk towards the sun. As for Owen, well, the less said of his own diminishing existence, the better. I had moved on from that stunted, ignoble chapter, devoting what precious energy remained towards cultivating the two flames now burning bright before me. My son was my shining future, but my scorched redemption was entirely my own. I pulled into the driveway of Tristan's house, heart swelling with excitement to surprise my sweet grandson Eli on his 8th birthday. Little did I know the surprise would be entirely mine, one that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my son and daughter-in-law. The doorbell went unanswered after several rings, so I tried the handle. Unlocked. "Hello? Tristan? Nadia?" I called out, letting myself inside. An eerie silence blanketed the house, normally filled with the laughter and pitter-patter of little feet. A muffled whimper drew me towards the staircase. Under the stairs, a small door caught my eye, the kind meant for storage, not for... No, the thought was too horrifying to entertain. "Eli? Honey, are you in there?" I gasped, chest tightening. "Grandma?" His tiny voice trembled from behind the door. "Help me, please." With shaking hands, I tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge, locked from the outside. 1,000 scenarios raced through my mind, each more disturbing than the next. I steadied myself against the wall, guilt and dread crashing over me in waves for not visiting sooner. From the corner of my eye, I spotted a toolbox and grabbed a hammer, my fragile grasp on composure crumbling. "Stand back, sweetie." 3 solid strikes, and the flimsy door splintered open. There he was, my beautiful grandson, cowering in the dimly lit space, eyes wide with fear and relief. Tears stained his pale cheeks, his vibrant red hair matted and unkempt. "Oh, Eli." I choked out, scooping him into my arms, cradling him close. He clung to me with a desperation that broke my heart into pieces. I'm so sorry, I mumbled into his hair, cursing myself for 1,000 should-haves and could-haves. His small body trembled like a leaf against me. Once the initial shock subsided, a burning rage replaced the sorrow. How could Tristan and Nadia do this? What kind of parents? No, what kind of human beings? "It's okay, honey, you're safe now," I assured him, doing my best to keep my tone even and soothing, despite the maelstrom within. "Can you tell me how long?" He shook his head fiercely, eyes squeezed shut as if to block out the memories. "Too long. Days, I think. I'd yell and bang, but they never came. Just slid food under sometimes." White-hot fury coursed through my veins, and I silently vowed to ensure Tristan and Nadia paid for this unforgivable cruelty towards their own flesh and blood. But first, I needed to get Eli out of this house of horrors. "Pack a bag. Anything you want to take with you. We're leaving." My tone brooked no argument. He nodded obediently, looking smaller and frailer than any child should. By the time I'd calmed down enough to call Tristan, the rage had crystallized into a cold, hard knot of determination in my gut. He picked up after several rings, utterly nonchalant, like he hadn't just committed one of the worst betrayals a parent could. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" Those 3 words, spoken so casually, were the spark that ignited my fury into an inferno. "What do you mean, what's up?" I snarled into the phone, my fury simmering just below the surface. "I'm at your house, and I just found Eli locked in a closet under the stairs." There was a brief pause, and I could practically see Tristan's nonchalant shrug through the phone. "So? That's just how we discipline him when he misbehaves. He knows the rules." My jaw dropped, revulsion churning in my gut. How could he be so callous about treating his own son like a prisoner? "You can't be serious, Tristan. He's just a little boy. Don't you dare try to tell me how to parent my own kid, Mom." His voice took on an unpleasant edge. "You're overreacting as usual. He's fine, just throwing one of his tantrums." "Overreacting? You locked your 8-year-old child in a cramped, dark space for days with barely any food or human contact. What's wrong with you?" I was practically shouting now, anger and disbelief warring within me. "We have it under control," he said with an infuriating calmness that made my blood boil. "This doesn't concern you. Stay out of it." I opened my mouth to unleash another verbal lashing, but the dial tone cut me off. He'd hung up. Chest heaving, I stared at my trembling hands as a chilling realization crept over me. This was no one-time disciplinary tactic gone too far. The way Tristan had spoken, so coldly and matter-of-fact, hinted at something much more sinister. An ingrained pattern of cruelty, of depriving an innocent child of his basic rights and needs. Shaking my head, I leaned back against the wall, fighting against the swell of nausea. How could my own son, my flesh and blood, be capable of such monstrous behavior? What kind of person had he become while I wasn't watching? Unbidden, memories flickered through my mind. Happy childhood moments, Tristan's bright smile and pealing laughter as we baked cookies or played in the yard. It felt like a lifetime ago, those echoes of the warm, loving boy I'd raised. Where had I gone wrong? What had warped and twisted him into this shell of a man? Or had the seeds of cruelty lurked beneath the surface all along, only to bloom once I looked away? A tiny sniffle made me jerk upright. Eli stood in the hallway, bag clutched to his chest, eyes rimmed with fresh tears. Of course he'd overheard every ugly word. Crossing the room in 2 long strides, I gathered him into my arms, murmuring soft, soothing words into his hair. "It's gonna be okay, honey. I'm gonna make sure they never ever hurt you again." And in that moment, as his small arms wound around my neck, my path became clear. No more agonizing over where Tristan had strayed. It didn't matter now. He was beyond reach, beyond saving maybe. But Eli, that sweet, innocent little boy, still had a chance at a decent life. A life full of kindness, love, and stability that every child deserved. Even if it meant waging war against my own son, I would stop at nothing to rescue him from this nightmare. Settling Eli into the passenger seat, I forced a reassuring smile. "Why don't you pick a movie for us to watch at my place? Something with happy endings." He nodded, mustering up a watery grin that tugged at my heart. In that moment, I made a silent vow. By the time we reached our happy ending, Tristan would face the consequences for his unforgivable crimes. No matter what it took, I would make sure of it. The drive back to my place was a blur, my mind spinning with half-formed plans of how to handle the situation with Tristan and Nadia. One thing was certain, I couldn't take them on alone. I needed allies. My first call was to Dale, my estranged husband. We'd fallen out of touch over the years, our marriage slowly eroding until the distance became a chasm. But he was still Eli's grandfather, and I had to hope some shred of paternal instinct remained. "Dale, it's Lorraine," I said when he picked up, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I need your help with something." There was a pregnant pause, then a resigned sigh. "What is it this time?" Clenching my jaw, I willed myself to remain calm. "It's about Eli, our grandson." That seemed to get his attention. "Go on." The words came tumbling out in a breathless rush: Eli's captivity, Tristan's shocking dismissal of it all, my own fears for the boy's well-being. To his credit, Dale listened in stone-faced silence until I finally trailed off. "You're telling me our son had his own kid locked up, like some kind of prisoner?" His voice was dangerously low. "Yes." I glanced over at Eli, slumped against the window in an exhausted sleep. And judging by how casual Tristan was about it, I don't think this was the first time. Another heavy pause then. "That's it. I'm calling the cops. We'll have those two psychos arrested for child endangerment." "Wait," I cut him off sharply. As satisfying as that idea was, it felt too rash, too risky. "We can't go to the authorities until we have rock-solid proof. You know how the system can fail kids." "So what do you suggest?" My gaze settled on Eli's sleeping form, and a steely resolve solidified within me. We need to investigate on our own first, figure out exactly what's going on, and gather evidence of any wrongdoing, so it's airtight. "You want us to perform a full background check on our own son?" Dale sounded skeptical. "On both of them," I clarified grimly. "There has to be some explanation for why they're treating Eli so horrendously. We find that, we'll get to the bottom of this whole mess." A heavy silence then. "Fine, but not because I care about that boy's welfare anymore." His voice dripped with disdain. "Just because he's my grandson, you know, bloodline and all that?" I bristled at his callousness, but bit back a scathing retort. I'd deal with Dale's indifference towards Eli later. For now, I had to play along if I wanted a hope of gaining his help. "Okay then, we start digging into their lives first thing tomorrow. Finances, personal records, everything. No stone left unturned." Dale grunted in assent. "And if we find anything?" A burst of vindictive satisfaction surged through me. "Then we make them pay." The next few days passed by in a whirlwind of information gathering. Between my tenacious research skills and Dale's business connections, we slowly unpicked every tangled thread of Tristan and Nadia's lives. Their finances were in shambles, racked with debt and comic strings of bad investments. A large portion of debt seemed tied to Nadia's previous marriage, which ended messily and likely cost a small fortune in legal fees. Speaking of her ex, I made a point to track him down. The details he shared painted an ugly picture of Nadia's past: accusations of infidelity, substance abuse, even violence. Could she still be clinging to those toxic patterns? As for Tristan, there were signs of shady business dealings and despicable con artistry. Several former employers and partners had fallen victim to his schemes over the years. Had he been grooming Eli as his next payday? "You think they've been stealing from the kid?" Dale wondered grimly when I shared my suspicions. "Seems like the type of lowlife move they'd pull." I clenched my jaw, a wave of nausea crashing over me. The more I learned, the more monstrous my own son and daughter-in-law became. Raking a hand through my hair, I turned to face Dale with a look of grim determination. "Well, we can't let them get away with it any longer. It's time we put an end to their sick games." With our findings laid out before us, Dale and I began plotting our next moves. We had more than enough damning evidence against Tristan and Nadia. Now it was a matter of using it effectively. We could release it all to the media, let them crucify those two jackals in the court of public opinion, Dale suggested with relish. I shook my head, worrying my bottom lip. As satisfying as that would be, we can't. Not yet. It would just put Eli in the crosshairs and make him the victim all over again. Then what? Take it to the cops like I originally suggested? Exhaling slowly, I considered our options. Going through official channels could mean months of legal red tape and he said, she said battles. Meanwhile, Eli would suffer. No, we needed a surefire way to take them down swiftly while securing his safety, a way to force their hand and back them into a corner with no escape. "I have a friend," I began slowly. "From law school, Martha Wilkins. She's made a career handling cases just like this one. Crooked parents trying to milk their kids' inheritance, neglect, you name it." Understanding dawned in Dale's eyes. "So you'll get this hotshot lawyer lady to put the screws to Tristan and Nadia? Air all their dirty laundry in court?" "Among other things," I replied cryptically. "Help me gather up all the paperwork. I'll set up a meeting with Martha for tomorrow." Martha's office was as sleek and professional as I remembered, though her warm smile and sharp eyes were the same as ever. "Lorraine, it's been too long." She enveloped me in a brief hug before guiding us to a pair of leather chairs. Though I must say, I wish our reunion was under better circumstances. With a sigh, I waved a hand at the boxes of files surrounding us. That's an understatement. Take a look at what we've uncovered about my son and daughter-in-law. For the next 2 hours, Martha pored over our findings with her trademark meticulous intensity. Her brow furrowed deeper with each new layer of depravity revealed, the financial deceptions, signs of blatant neglect, even the account from Nadia's ex-husband. "I've heard of money-grubbing parents before," she muttered, shaking her head in disgust. "But keeping their own child as a literal prisoner in the name of fleecing his trust fund? That's a new low, even for me." Unconsciously, my fists clenched in my lap. "So you'll take the case? Do everything in your power to make sure Tristan and Nadia face the consequences?" "You don't even need to ask." Martha's expression was one of grim resolve. "I'll call in every favor I can to push this through the courts at top speed. We'll bury those two beneath an avalanche of evidence before they know what hit them." She leaned back, fixing me with an intent look. "But I'll need your help, too. As Eli's closest living relatives, your testimony and cooperation will be instrumental." I met her gaze steadily. "Anything. I'll do whatever it takes to protect that boy." A ghost of a smile played across Martha's lips. "That's what I wanted to hear." Over the next few weeks, a whirlwind of depositions, documentation, and strategy sessions consumed every free moment. Martha was ruthlessly efficient, anticipating every possible angle of defense Tristan and Nadia might attempt. At her urging, I took steps to be appointed as Eli's legal guardian, should we wrest him from their custody. It was a lengthy, draining process, but I gladly endured it all with the goal of giving him a stable home in sight. When at last the court date arrived, armed with a veritable armory of evidence, and flanked by Martha's wily paralegal team, I felt an odd sense of calm. The fireworks would come soon enough. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" Dale eyed me sidelong as we strode up the courthouse steps, Eli's small hand encased in mine. "In front of the whole family, on his birthday of all days?" My jaw set in a stubborn line. "It has to be today. They've had this coming for too long." In truth, I'd chosen this date and venue very deliberately. Our entire extended clan would be gathered at Tristan and Nadia's place for Eli's 8th birthday party later. What better way to expose their sins against their own flesh and blood than surrounded by all those they'd deceived? I could only imagine the looks on their faces when they realized the Negligent Parents of the Year award was theirs. Sure enough, my son and daughter-in-law were already seated with the rest of the family when we arrived, the perfect picture of domestic bliss. A tide of expectant murmurs washed over the crowd as the group recognized Martha striding in behind us. Nadia was the first to spot us, her perfectly curated smile slipping ever so slightly. "What's going on here?" Tristan rose to his feet, all artificial joviality. "I should be asking you three the same thing. What's with the hostility, Mom?" Draping a supportive arm around Eli's shoulders, I leveled him with a look that could cut glass. "Maybe you should ask your son about hostility." Confusion rippled through the assembled guests, but Nadia merely rolled her eyes in condescending amusement. "For God's sake, Lorraine, not this again." "Shut your mouth," Dale growled, and I started slightly at the venom in his tone. "You don't get to dismiss her concerns after the sick crap you two pulled." Murmurs intensified, tinged with disbelief and unease. Martha stepped forward, cool and unruffled, as she spread a series of damning dossiers across the table. "We have extensive documentation of your actions towards Elijah, including willful neglect, financial exploitation of his trust fund, and the unjustified deprivation of basic needs." She gestured for silence as shocked gasps erupted around the room. "I'll skip the niceties and give you one opportunity to start making amends. Full custody of the boy will be transferred to Mrs. Hawthorne here immediately, pending the court's final ruling. You'll also repay every cent you siphoned from his accounts." There was a beat of stunned silence as the words sank in. Twin looks of abject horror twisted Tristan and Nadia's faces before morphing into snares of rage. "You've got to be freaking kidding me." Tristan slammed his hands on the table, making several guests jump. "Just because Mom had some stupid delusions about our parenting? You're blowing this way out of proportion. Get off your high horses, both of you." Nadia jutted her chin haughtily, a studied mask of disdain falling into place to conceal her panic. "Our finances are none of your business, nor how we raise our son." My heart clenched at the way she refused to acknowledge Eli as her own. Martha arched an unimpressed eyebrow. "So I'll take that as a refusal to cooperate, then?" "You're damn right." Tristan looked about 2 seconds from vaulting over the table. "We don't have to listen to your self-righteous garbage." On the contrary. Another folder landed on the table with a thud, and the image of a familiar dingy room, harshly illuminated, filled the screen. "You'll find this garbage quite enlightening, I think." A collective gasp rang out through the room as the grim reality set in. Surveillance footage of the tiny closet space where Eli had been imprisoned for days. His tear-stained face and muffled cries were plain as day, surrounded by harsh shadows and stifling walls. Tristan went ashen, mouth working soundlessly as Nadia slumped against her seat, hand fluttering to her mouth. I ground my teeth, fighting back the urge to throttle them both then and there. How dare they look so appalled now, after willingly inflicting such cruel conditions on their own child? The outrage poured forth from our friends and relatives in waves of angry shouting that drowned out all my instincts for vengeance. Because in that moment, the devastated look in Eli's eyes was all I could focus on. He didn't deserve any of this ugly airing of family secrets and toxic legacy of betrayal that wasn't his shame to carry. At that moment, I was fiercely glad Martha had taken charge. Her pragmatic ruthlessness spared Eli from having to witness our blistering condemnations of the parents who had so grievously failed him. No, he'd been through enough ugliness. It was time to start looking towards a future of healing. Gathering his slight form against me, I murmured low reassurances into his hair as the chaos swirled around us. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was the beginning of something new, I realized with a surge of hope. A road towards redemption, away from this poisoned legacy of cruelty and neglect. Tristan and Nadia might have been battles lost, but the war for Eli's soul was just getting started. And this time, I was determined to win. The aftermath of our dramatic confrontation was a whirlwind that still makes my head spin in retrospect. Martha wasted no time, pressing her advantage with cold precision while Tristan and Nadia floundered. Within hours, emergency custody papers were signed and law enforcement was on the scene. Nadia dissolved into hysterics as they slapped cuffs on her wrists, shrieking invectives that would have made a sailor blush. Tristan, for his part, maintained a seething, sullen silence right up until they separated them for booking. Then the dam broke. Staring at me with undisguised loathing, he fought against the officer's restraints like a rabid dog. "You did this," he snarled, spittle flying. "You poisoned everything with your deluded vendetta." "Your actions poisoned this family," I shot back, unflinching even as Dale shifted protectively in front of Eli. "Maybe if you hadn't been so reckless with your son's well-being, so blind to anything but your greed." "He's not yours anymore," Tristan continued ranting, words slurring as his anger spiraled into near incoherency. "You don't get to sweep in and play hero after years of being a lousy, inattentive gur." The backhanded blow caught him square across the jaw, snapping his head sideways with a meaty thwack. Even the officers gave Dale a wide berth as he towered over Tristan's crumpled form, chest heaving like a bellows. "Don't you dare talk about what kind of grandparent she is," he growled through gritted teeth. "When your own twisted minds led you to torment an innocent child for money." Silence fell, heavy as a pall. Tristan glared up at his father through a mask of bloody spittle and swelling flesh, the fight temporarily beaten out of him. With a last contemptuous sneer, Dale shouldered past the stunned officers and came to collect Eli and me. "You did the right thing," he murmured gruffly into my hair as we embraced, the closest to affection he could muster in that moment. "That boy's better off with anyone but those two excuses for human beings." I squeezed him fiercely, the adrenaline high from the confrontation rapidly waning to leave me drained, yet perversely buoyed by our victory. It was done. Eli was finally truly safe. All that remained was ensuring he got the love and care he deserved going forward. And that, I silently vowed, was a battle I would fight with every last breath. With the initial crisis resolved, a strange sort of limbo settled over us in the following weeks. Though the custody papers granted me temporary guardianship of Eli, the road ahead remained fraught with challenges. I lost track of how many legal meetings, court dates, and blistering cross-examinations Martha put us through. Every shred of Tristan and Nadia's elaborate tangle of lies was meticulously unpicked, cauterized, and readied as exhibits. The fraud charges alone were damning, given the paper trail of diverted funds from Eli's trust account. But Martha assured me that the abuse charges, locking him away for days at a time, withholding food and necessities, would inevitably result in the maximum sentence. The system doesn't take kindly to parents who view their own offspring as caged commodities, she said grimly. We'll see they're made examples of. I could only nod, ignoring the unsettling relish in her tone. Personal feelings aside, Martha was a ruthless ally in this fight, and I wasn't about to argue with results. For his part, Eli remained a subdued shadow throughout the proceedings. Despite our best efforts, he shied away from counseling and group activities, haunted eyes downcast whenever Tristan or Nadia's names arose. It's going to take time for those wounds to heal, Dale cautioned whenever I fretted over the boy's withdrawal. And rationally, I knew he was right. Overcoming the trauma and emotional scarring inflicted by one's own parents couldn't be undone overnight. But that comprehension did little to ease the mounting guilt and worry gnawing at my heart. Had I failed Eli by not recognizing the signs sooner? All these years of missing holidays and birthdays, could I ever make that up to him now? The answers didn't come easily. But bit by bit, through patience and stubborn determination on both our parts, the walls began to show hairline cracks. It started small. Eli timidly agreeing to color with me one quiet afternoon, while Dale watched his loud courtroom shows, as oblivious to our bonding as ever. From there, we progressed to games of Go Fish and Crazy Eights, my genuine laughter at his horrendous bluffing faces earning the first tiny quirks of his lips. Before long, laughter and chattiness seeped back into the house like a palliative balm after the rolling darkness. I introduced Eli to swimming, his initial trepidation melting into uninhibited glee as he cut through the waters with strong, sure strokes. An art class yielded the first vibrant, unrestrained streaks of color across fresh canvases, and through it all, the fragile bond between us grew stronger with each new smile, each peal of laughter replaying in my mind like a soothing melody. The boy I'd feared was too wounded to recover, blossomed with each day of freedom from his parents' toxic influence. There were still bad days, of course. Triggers that sent Eli retreating into a pensive shell of himself for hours or even days at a time. But we weathered those storms together, side by side, and emerged stronger for it in the end. On one such day, the sun had long since set beyond the den's picture windows before Eli stirred from his hunched position on the couch. Rubbing his eyes, he shuffled over and wordlessly crawled into my lap, nestling against me in a contented silence. My breath caught as my arms instinctively folded around his small frame, marveling at the implicit trust in his actions. Setting my chin atop his tousled curls, I let out a shaky sigh, gathering the shreds of composure that loneliness and fresh memories of Tristan's cruelty had frayed. In that moment, gently rocking my grandson, I could scarcely believe how far we'd come. Him from that haunted, hollowed-out husk I'd first beheld in the closet, and me from the guilt-racked woman tormented over failing to prevent his suffering, holding this quietly content child bruised but not broken by the ugliness he'd endured, filled me with a sense of purpose more profound than I'd ever known. Scars would remain, but they didn't have to define him or me. All that mattered now was nurturing the resilience and fighting spirit, persevering against all odds. And that was a battle I vowed silently into the stillness, that I would fight beside him every single day until my last breath. The night of the sentencing hearing was one I'll never forget. Tristan and Nadia were led in wearing matching orange jumpsuits, hands and feet shackled. Where Nadia had her head bowed in sullen defeat, Tristan met my gaze head-on, with undisguised hatred burning in his eyes. I returned it with a look of cold indifference. He no longer had any power to rattle me. Martha stood ramrod straight beside us, lips pressed into a thin line of grim satisfaction as the judge entered. She'd cautioned us against expecting the maximum sentences, but her reputation preceded her. I had a feeling the so-called justice system wouldn't dare cross her. And I was right. After a mercifully brief recounting of the relevant facts, the hammer came down harder than I dared hope. For the crimes of child abuse, neglect, fraud, and embezzlement against a minor child's trust fund, I sentence you both to 15 years imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Nadia swayed on her feet as if struck, complexion going deathly pale. But my eyes were locked on Tristan, drinking in the dismay and impotent fury twisting his features into an ugly rictus. Additionally, you will be compelled to make full restitution of the stolen funds to Mr. Elijah Hawthorne upon your release. Failure to comply will result in an extension of your sentences. Martha's shark-like smile was triumphant as she caught my eye amid the courtroom din, mouthing, "I told you so." She'd played her gambit flawlessly, as always. Tristan was still yelling his outrage as he was hauled away, vitriol spewing from his lips. But the hatred in his eyes when they met mine burned itself into my memory, searing and indelible. I refused to give him the satisfaction of flinching away, because in the end, he and Nadia were the ones vanquished, beaten at their own twisted game by the family whose bond they tried to shatter. It was a lesson I hoped haunted their every waking moment behind bars. Eli watched the whole proceeding in numb silence. I ached to pull him close, to shield him from the ugliness being laid so cruelly bare. But he was no longer a scared little boy. He'd borne witness to the depths of human cruelty and prevailed through courage and resilience. This was closure, plain and simple. One last look at the monsters who'd tried so viciously to break him before leaving them behind forever. The drive home passed in a blur, none of us speaking. What words could encapsulate the profound shift this day signified? It was Eli who finally broke the heavy silence as we pulled up to the house, fixing me with those serious green eyes that had seen far too much darkness for one so young. "I'm glad it's really over," he murmured. "That they got what they deserved, you know." I reached across the bench seat to squeeze his hand. "Me too, honey. It's all over now." The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of press, legal wrangling, and celebration from friends and family over our hard-won justice. But the moment that stood out most vividly was Eli's first art show at his new school. He'd been champing at the bit to show me his latest masterpieces, brimming with the pride and excitement of any kid his age. And finally, on opening night, I got to bask in the brilliant splashes of color and rebirth he'd committed to canvas. Each one was a searing reflection of the journey that led us here. Dark, muted tones juxtaposed against explosions of vibrant life. Harsh lines fracturing then melding back together in a mosaic of regeneration. Wordless stories of tragedy and redemption laid bare in acrylic strokes, more poignant than any writer could capture. "That one there is how I felt for a long time," Eli explained, gripping my hand as we moved from canvas to canvas. His voice was contemplative, worlds away from the hollow echoes I'll never unhear from that closet. Scared, sad, like everything was cracking apart into pieces that I couldn't fix. He paused before a canvas emblazoned with a brilliant phoenix taking flight, wings unfurling in a blaze of crimson and gold. But this one is us now, rising up out of all the ugliness and hurt to start over, finding the color and beauty in life on the other side of the storm. Does that make sense? I pulled him close, blinking back tears of fierce pride and wonder at the resilient, insightful young man he was blossoming into. Another example of the tenacity with which new life can spring from unimaginable darkness. "It makes perfect sense," I murmured into his hair. Because in that moment, bathed in the kaleidoscopic rebirth of his art, I saw the first rays of the new dawn we'd both fought so hard to reach. And as I held him, surrounded by this latest rebirth, one truth became startlingly clear. We would meet each fresh challenge rise over the horizon together, standing united before whatever storms lay ahead. Mother and grandson soldiering onwards into the light. It was the annual Memorial Day barbecue in our suburban neighborhood, and I should have been enjoying the warm sunshine and the mouth-watering aromas of sizzling burgers. Instead, a cold sense of dread washed over me as I overheard a hushed conversation between Nancy Wilson and Claire Robinson. "Did you hear about Neil Morrison's shady business dealings?" Nancy whispered conspiratorially. "Rumor has it he's been skimming profits off that craft brewery his wife inherited." My heart plummeted at the mention of my husband's name. I discreetly moved closer, trying to blend in with the gathered crowd. Claire shook her head. That's not all. I heard he's been having an affair with that young aide who works for the mayor. Rage and disbelief boiled inside me. An affair? Embezzlement? Impossible. Neil and I had been together since college, building a wonderful life centered around family values and my grandfather's cherished brewery legacy. Mom, can I have another burger? My 5-year-old son Milo tugged at my sundress, jarring me from my whirlwind of emotions. I plastered on a smile, ruffling his blonde hair. Of course, honey. Why don't you ask Dad to grill you one? As Milo scampered off to find Neil, I caught the pitying looks from Nancy and Claire. Did they suspect I had overheard? My cheeks burned with humiliation and anger. How dare they gossip about my husband behind my back? Later that evening, after putting Milo to bed, I stormed into the living room where Neil was watching TV. We need to talk. He glanced up, eyebrows raised. What's wrong, babe? The use of that sickeningly sweet nickname made me want to scream. I overheard something disturbing at the barbecue today, about you. Neil's expression hardened, eyes narrowing. What kind of rumors are people spreading now? That you've been embezzling from the brewery and having an affair with the mayor's aide. The words tumbled out in a torrent, each one slicing into my heart. For a long moment Neil was silent, his face unreadable. Then he let out a bitter laugh. You can't be serious, Lena. You're going to believe the malicious gossip of bored suburban housewives over your own husband? So it's not true? I pressed, searching his eyes for any flicker of deception. He rose from the couch, putting his hands on my shoulders as he looked me squarely in the eye. Of course it's not true. You're my world, Lena. You and Milo. I would never betray our family like that. His words should have reassured me, but a nagging seed of doubt had taken root. As I gazed at the man I thought I knew better than anyone, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying to me. Over the next few days, I found myself scrutinizing Neil's every move, his tardiness from work, his secretive phone calls, his unexplained absences. Each discrepancy fed the growing beast of suspicion gnawing at me. I knew I couldn't ignore the rumors any longer. For the sake of my son and my family's legacy, I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Little did I know, the secrets I was about to uncover would shatter my world forever. In the days following the barbecue, I was consumed by a hunger for the truth that gnawed at me incessantly. Neil's nonchalant dismissal of the rumors did little to quell my growing doubts and suspicions about who he really was. I knew I needed evidence, something concrete, to validate or refute the whispers about his misdeeds. Hiring a private investigator crossed my mind, but that felt like an extreme violation of Neil's privacy, at least for now. My mind raced as I tried to think of ways to discreetly look into his affairs. That's when I noticed his car's glove compartment looked disheveled, as if it had been hastily closed. Steeling my nerves, I popped it open after Neil left for work one morning. My hands trembled as I rummaged through its contents until my fingers landed on an unfamiliar burner phone. My heart pounded as I turned it on, watching the home screen flicker to life, to reveal a stream of coded messages. 7 p.m., warehouse on 5th. Package is secured, funds will be transferred. Need to keep this off HQ's radar. The knot in my stomach twisted tighter with each cryptic message I read. What kind of shady deals was Neil mixed up in? I felt sick just imagining the possibilities. Working late again, babe? Neil's voice made me nearly jump out of my skin as he strolled into the living room, loosening his tie. I fumbled to turn off the burner phone and stuff it back into the glove compartment. Yeah, just catching up on some emails. He quirked an eyebrow at me. Everything okay? You seem jumpy. Mustering all my willpower, I plastered on what I hoped was a convincing smile. I'm fine, just feeling a bit run down from this merger we're working on at the brewery. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but Neil seemed to accept it with a nod and a peck on my cheek before wandering off to the kitchen. That night, after Neil fell into a whiskey-laced slumber, I tiptoed to his home office and booted up his computer, my heart pounding in my ears. If he was engaging in something illegal, maybe there would be evidence on here. Email after email only deepened the pit of dread in my stomach. Communications about under-the-table payments, confidential brewery recipes being covertly shared with competitors, dollar amounts that made my head spin just looking at them. The man I thought I knew was a mirage. This emails laid bare the harsh reality. Neil was a liar, a cheat, a criminal. He had been defrauding my family's company and betraying my trust in the cruelest way imaginable. Tears stung my eyes as I finally understood the depth of his deceit. But my anguish was rapidly being replaced by a scorching anger. How dare he defile everything my grandfather built from the ground up through decades of hard work and integrity? I would make Neil pay for this. He would face the consequences for every last illicit deal, every betrayal, every moment of treachery. I didn't know how yet, but I would bring him down. No more Mrs. Nice Wife. It was time to fight fire with fire. Armed with the damning evidence from Neil's computer and burner phone, I knew I needed professional help to properly investigate the full extent of his betrayal. I kept a low profile around Neil, continuing to play the role of the doting, oblivious wife as I secretly met with a private investigator named Frank Jennings. Frank was grizzled and no-nonsense, just the type I needed to discreetly dig into Neil's tangled web of lies. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town to discuss my concerns. "You were right to come to me, Mrs. Morrison," Frank said gruffly as he pored over the emails and messages I had printed out. "This is some serious shady shit your husband is mixed up in." I cringed at his blunt delivery, but appreciated his candidness. "Just call me Lena. And yeah, it seems Neil has been very busy behind my back with God knows what kind of illegal dealings." Frank nodded, rubbing his stubbly chin. "Well, from what I can gather, we're looking at embezzlement, fraud, corporate espionage, and this here?" He tapped one of the messages. "Looks like your hubby might also be having himself a little extramarital fun, too." My cheeks burned at the insinuation. An affair? With who?" "Some young thing name of Marina Castillo. She's an aide for the mayor." The words felt like a physical blow to my gut. An affair. How could I have been so blind? Over the next few weeks, Frank gathered an overwhelming mountain of proof. Financial records, surveillance photos, witness testimonies. It became undeniable that Neil had not only been systematically looting funds from my family's brewery, but also selling corporate secrets and confidential recipes to our biggest competitors. And his mistress, Marina, appeared to be his willing accomplice and confidant through it all. One night, Frank played me an audio recording of Neil and Marina meeting at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. Between the lewd giggling and cringeworthy pet names, my heart shattered into pieces all over again as I listened to them conspire about their next underhanded scheme. When the recording ended, tears of humiliation and rage streamed down my face. Frank sat silently, no doubt used to these kinds of emotional breakdowns from the spouses of cheaters and liars like Neil. But underneath my grief, a bright ember of fury was being stoked into an unquenchable blaze. I would make Neil regret ever crossing me and jeopardizing everything I held dear. "What now, Mrs. Lena?" Frank asked gruffly, sensing the shift in my demeanor. I stared out the diner window at the grimy street, my jaw clenched with resolve. "Now, we take that bastard down. Make him pay for every last sin." For weeks, I had been frozen by the agony of Neil's betrayal. But the time for wallowing in shock and pity was over. He had awoken a vengeful awoke in me, and heaven help Neil once I was done with him. The drive home from the diner felt like I was in a trance. My mind whirled with equal parts fury and strategy as I plotted how to bring Neil's house of lies crashing down around him. Part of me yearned to storm into the house, to hurl the incriminating evidence in his smug face, and watch the shock and shame wash over him. But I forced myself to remain calm and calculated. I needed to keep playing the role of the unsuspecting wife a little longer, let him dig his grave even deeper before I buried him in it. When I arrived home, Neil was watching TV with a glass of scotch, looking utterly unbothered. "Hey, babe, you were out late again," he remarked as I entered, putting on my best nonchalant act. "Yeah, just tying up some loose ends at the brewery." The lie slid smoothly off my tongue as I fought to keep my contempt hidden behind a placid smile. Neil grinned and patted the spot beside him. "Well, get your cute butt over here. There's still time for a little nightcap." He waggled his eyebrows lasciviously. Bile rose in my throat as I imagined him making those same lecherous overtures to his precious Marina, but I swallowed my revulsion and slinked over to cuddle up beside him, playing along with his game as I plotted his downfall. Over the next few days, I watched Neil continue his dual life of deception, smiling to my face while gallivanting around indulging his sleazy vices behind my back. The oblivious routine he kept up around me, unaware of how much I knew, was almost comical. Finally, I could take no more of the charade. I cornered him in the kitchen one afternoon after confirming Milo was over at a friend's house. "What's going on, babe? You've seemed off lately," Neil asked with a carefully measured dose of concern as he poured himself a drink. I stalked up to him, snatching the crystal tumbler from his hands and slamming it down with a crash, splattering scotch across the counter. "Cut the crap, Neil! I know everything!" He recoiled in shock before quickly regaining his composure, lips curling into a sneer. "Really? And what, pray tell, do you think you know? I know about the embezzlement from my family's company. I know you've been selling corporate secrets to our competitors. I know about your sordid little fling with Marina." To his credit, Neil barely flinched, covering his surprise with a condescending chuckle. Lena, you've really let your imagination run wild this time. This is just sad, not to mention insulting. After everything we've been through together?" He took a step towards me, reaching out to caress my cheek almost tenderly. "You're my world, babe. You have to know that. All these crazy accusations, they're just paranoid delusions." My blood boiled at his mocking, gaslighting tone. In one blistering motion, I whipped out the burner phone with the incriminating messages and hurled it squarely at his face, watching it clock him in the jaw. Neil reeled back, clutching his face and staring at me with a mask of shock and wounded pride. "You crazy bye!" "Shut up," I roared, adrenaline and pure venom coursing through me. "I have proof of every last depraved thing you've done. Financial records, recordings, everything. So cut the innocent act, you slimy bastard." We stood in seething silence for a moment, each glaring at the other with a molten contempt. His eyes flickered with uncertainty for a brief second before hardening once more. Neil straightened up, puffing out his chest defiantly. "You think you've got me all figured out, huh? You don't know a goddamn thing, Lena. Not really." With that vague, ominous warning, he stormed out, leaving me breathing raggedly amid the wreckage. The gauntlet had been thrown. Now the real battle would begin. After the explosive confrontation with Neil, the air was thick with tension around the house. He tried putting on a nonchalant front, but I could sense the disquiet lurking beneath his arrogant facade. For my part, I stayed coldly civil, biding my time and gathering more ammunition for the war ahead. Frank, the private investigator, had become my closest confidant during this chaos. We met frequently at our discreet diner to review the mounting evidence of Neil's malfeasance. "This is some heavy stuff, Lena," Frank remarked one afternoon as he shuffled through the incriminating financial records. "Your husband's looking at serious prison time if we take this to the DA's office." I nodded grimly, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug. As much as Neil's betrayal sickened me, the idea of him rotting behind bars gave me no joy either. I just wanted to uproot the cancer he'd planted in my family's legacy. "Actually, Frank, I had something else in mind for dealing with this dirtbag." He cocked an eyebrow quizzically, so I laid out my plan to launch a coordinated takedown at the brewery's upcoming annual gala. Neil's misdeeds would be explosively revealed before the entire community, destroying his credibility and showing everyone his true colors. "You sure you want to go nuclear like that?" Frank asked skeptically. "Public humiliation on that scale, it's no walk in the park." "He deserves that and more for what he's done," I replied, feeling my anger flare up again. "Neil has jeopardized my family, our business, our entire livelihood, all in service of funding his vices and stroking his ego. It's time he suffered the consequences of his selfish choices." In the following days, I doubled down on my efforts, coordinating an allied strike force against Neil. Longtime business partners and vendors Neil had swindled were eager to join the crusade after I presented the facts. Several employees he'd deceived also threw their support behind my insurrection, providing even more damaging testimony. On the home front, Neil had clearly sensed the shifting winds. His usual suave hubris had given way to sullenness and paranoia that he tried masking with more alcohol. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" he demanded one night as I lingered in the living room while he channel surfed. I met his accusatory glare evenly. "Like what?" Like you've got some twisted scheme brewing in that head of yours? He took a swig from his tumbler, amber liquid sloshing over the rim. I shrugged nonchalantly. What would give you that idea? Neil opened his mouth to retort, but seemed to think better of it, grinding his jaw sullenly before returning his gaze to the television. I watched dispassionately as he quickly drained his glass, gazing through hooded eyes at the monster I once called my husband. The gala was only a few nights away. He would finally get the reckoning he deserved, and the brewing storm would break at last. The night of the brewery's annual gala had arrived, and an electric sense of anticipation coursed through me. Tonight would be Neil's night of reckoning, after months of lies and betrayal. I had gathered an army of witnesses and co-conspirators, disgruntled employees, vengeful business partners, anyone Neil had wronged during his reign of duplicity. Frank and I had meticulously compiled all the evidence into an undeniable case that would detonate at the climax of the evening. You ready for this? Frank muttered under his breath as we made our entrance into the lavish event hall where the gala was being held. I gave a terse nod, scanning the milling crowd of the city's business elite until my eyes landed on Neil, holding court near the bar as always. He was all smiles and swagger, downing a glass of scotch and soaking up the attention. For a fleeting moment, a ghost of my old affection for him stirred in my chest. Then I remembered the mountains of incriminating evidence detailing his litany of sins, the embezzlement, the corporate espionage, the callous infidelity. Any empathy I felt withered on the vine. The gala proceeded according to tradition, stuffy speeches, self-congratulatory award presentations, endless schmoozing over overpriced hors d'oeuvres. All the while, I bided my time, waiting for Neil's moment in the spotlight when I would detonate the bombshell. And what a year it's been for our hometown brewery, the mayor herself was saying as she took the stage, grinning broadly with Neil standing beside her. Thanks to our good friend Neil Morrison's outstanding leadership, the company has achieved remarkable growth and success. I caught Neil's eye from across the crowd and the ghost of a wink as he basked in the accolades. I suppressed the urge to sneer in revulsion. So it is my privilege to present to Neil the Businessman of the Year award. The mayor began clapping proudly, the entire audience following suit in thunderous applause. This was it. I gave Frank a steely nod, and he immediately dimmed the lights as I strode up on stage, ripping the microphone from the mayor's hands. Hold your applause, I growled, glaring out at the shocked, confused crowd. Neil Morrison doesn't deserve any awards tonight. He's a crook and a criminal who's been robbing this brewery and this city blind. A deafening silence fell over the audience. Neil's expression morphed into one of outraged disbelief. What is the meaning of this? He sputtered as I unleashed a blistering recitation of the laundry list of offenses, embezzlement figures, incriminating emails, records of illicit transactions. Each salvo burrowed in like shrapnel, drawing gasps and murmurs from the gala crowd. When I turned to Neil's mistress, Marina, sitting in the front row, I saw her features contorted in horror. And let's not forget, while Neil was looting from his employees and business partners, he was also stupping around behind my back with this little hussy. Chaos erupted in the event hall as Marina burst into hysterical tears. Other audience members erupted in raucous shouts and boos directed towards the stage. Through it all, Neil stood rooted to the spot, his face rapidly cycling through a spectrum of emotions: anger, panic, fear. I locked eyes with him, letting him absorb the debilitating optics of his public immolation. After sowing so many seeds of betrayal and deception, the harvest he reaped was a bitter, devastating reckoning. Within days, Neil was under arrest, slapped with multiple charges including embezzlement, bribery, and corporate fraud. His reputation and credibility were in smoldering ruins. I couldn't deny a deep sense of gratification watching karma render its ultimate verdict on my deceitful husband. But our saga wasn't over quite yet. In the aftermath of Neil's catastrophic public downfall at the gala, the legal heavens came crashing down on him with biblical force. He was swiftly arrested and hauled off in handcuffs as the damning evidence I had compiled with Frank's help was presented to the district attorney. Charges rained down like hellfire: embezzlement, corporate fraud, tax evasion, bribery. For weeks leading up to Neil's trial, A frenzy of media coverage dissected every tawdry detail of his betrayals. His affair with Marina was breathlessly splashed across the front pages, complete with the sordid recordings Frank had obtained of their indiscreet liaisons. The brewing company's shady business dealings and the plundering of its coffers were mercilessly exposed for the world to gape at. Reporters camped outside our home, hungry for any fresh morsel of scandal from the Morrison family drama. Through it all, Neil remained defiant, head held high as he arrived at the courthouse in his expensive suits. Only the faint muscle twitching in his clenched jaw hinted at the maelstrom of panic and loathing swirling beneath that arrogant veneer. "This is a disgraceful sham being perpetrated by my unhinged wife," he snarled at a pack of reporters shoving microphones in his face. "I was betrayed and set up by someone I trusted, but the truth will come out, and I will be exonerated." His audacious use of the victim card only fueled my resolve as I took the stand and mercilessly dismantled his lies over multiple searing days of testimony. I presented the documented evidence, layer by damning layer, until his pathetic protestations of innocence crumbled to ash. Marina, his former mistress, proved to be his ultimate undoing. Likely realizing her culpability and facing potential charges of her own, she flipped on Neil in exchange for leniency. The lurid details of their affair and illicit financial entanglements she revealed had the jury visibly recoiling in disgust. "Your Honor, this man is a rapacious, narcissistic con man who shattered my family's legacy with his unchecked greed and debauchery," I declared in my closing statement, leveling an accusatory glare at Neil. "He has earned nothing less than the most severe punishment the law can deliver." Neil held my gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Perhaps in those seconds, he finally glimpsed the man he had become, a ravenous, immoral shell obsessed only with satisfying his own vain desires at any cost. When the judge finally read the jury's verdict of guilty on all counts, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. Justice, at long last. The emotional circus played out in hushed murmurs and camera flashes around me. But my focus was solely on Neil. Shoulders slumped in defeat as the bailiff slapped cuffs around his wrists and led him away to await sentencing. He deserved every agonizing second of this humiliation after the suffering he had inflicted on me and our family. At the sentencing weeks later, the judge took no pity on Neil, slamming him with over 2 decades in federal prison plus millions in fines and restitution. As they hauled him off, I locked eyes with my disgraced husband one final time. He opened his mouth, perhaps to finally offer a sliver of apology or remorse. But I'd heard enough of his lies. With a curt shake of my head, I turned and walked out of that courtroom a free woman at last. The lengthy legal saga was finally over. But aside from justice served, there remained the matter of salvaging my family's brewery from the rubble of Neil's selfish decimation. With Neil's epic downfall now complete and the legal turmoil finally behind me, it was time to start rebuilding what he had so selfishly torn down. My family's brewery needed to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of his greed and deception. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work, poring over the company's finances with a newly hired forensic accounting team. The scale of Neil's embezzlement and corporate sabotage was even more staggering than I had initially uncovered. Millions had been siphoned into his secret slush funds. Invaluable trade secrets and recipes had been illicitly sold off to our biggest competitors, eroding our market share and brand value. It was a miracle the entire enterprise hadn't already collapsed under the weight of his treachery. My first priority was to cut out the lingering rot and install safeguards to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. I fired every last person, even tangentially complicit in enabling Neil's underhanded schemes. A new, if costly, corporate ethics program with robust auditing and oversight protocols was swiftly implemented. With a new, streamlined leadership team of my most trusted allies in place, we began the painful process of judicial asset repatriation, recouping as much of the stolen money and intellectual property as possible. It was a labyrinthine legal quagmire that seemed never-ending. "Don't worry, Mom, you've got this," Milo encouraged one night as I was hunched over spreadsheets, my eyes throbbing from hours of scrutinizing Neil's complex money trail. "You're the strongest person I know." My son's words were a soothing balm. He was my true north, the unblemished kernel of goodness that had survived the scorched earth of his father's villainy. I pulled Milo into a fierce embrace, realizing just how much of his childhood had been tainted by the atmospheric tension of Neil's secret misdeeds. No more. I vowed then and there that Milo would grow up witnessing the integrity and righteous resilience modeled by his mother in the wake of this nightmare. With each agonizing step forward in the long journey of restoring the brewery's tarnished reputation and fiscal solvency, I felt lighter. The shackles of denial and delusion about Neil's true nature no longer weighed me down. I had faced the hardest truths about the man I once loved and slayed those dragons. Some nights I still found my mind wandering what direction Neil's life had careened off toward behind those cold, unfeeling bars of his prison cell. I felt pity for the broken husk of a man he must have become, but any lingering hint of affection had been seared away by the betrayal and trauma he inflicted. A few years into my tenure as the new CEO, I made the ceremonial first pour of a fresh batch of our flagship IPA, using the original recipe from my grandfather's time at the helm. As I sipped the crisp, hoppy ale, the flavors carried more significance than just simple refreshment. This beer represented reclaimed legacy, righteous perseverance in the face of greed and deception, an enduring pride in doing things the right way through honesty and integrity. The brewery's annual holiday gala arrived again, always a festive source of community cheer and revelry. Except now, there were no seedy undercurrents of scandal or seething familial disharmony. Just joy, optimism, and renewed faith in the decades-old local institution that had been reborn under my steady hand. As I looked out over the smiling, celebrating crowd, I felt an immense sense of catharsis. The demons had been purged, the damage repaired. Neil's poisoned husk had been excised, and my family's true spirit preserved. It was a new dawn for me, for Milo, for the brewery's next generation of ethical, honorable leadership. My vengeance had been equally punishing and restorative, fitting justice for the man who tried to burn it all down for his own selfish vices. And in the end, I got to build it all back up stronger than ever before. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling as the weight of Aunt Miriam's words sank in. "I'm cutting you out of my will. After how you treated me, you deserve nothing." The line went dead, but her bitter condemnation echoed in my mind. Kyle stormed into the living room, his face flushed with anger. What did that old bat say now? I swallowed hard, bracing myself for his outburst. She's taking me out of her will, cutting me off completely. What? Kyle slammed his fist on the coffee table, making me flinch. After everything we've done for her? The ungrateful hag! My chest tightened as memories of Aunt Miriam's kindness resurfaced. She had been more of a mother to me than my own parents, taking me in after their tragic deaths. Her home became my sanctuary, her love a constant in my turbulent childhood. But that love had twisted into resentment over the years, poisoned by Kyle's relentless demands for money and favors. I had gone along too weak to stand up to him and his overbearing parents. "This is your fault," Kyle spat, his eyes blazing with accusation. "You never stood up for us, never fought for what's ours." Shame washed over me as I recalled the countless times I had enabled his greed, sacrificing my bond with Aunt Miriam for his empty promises of a lavish inheritance. I had been a coward, too afraid to defy him and lose the illusion of wealth he dangled before me. "We're not going to take this lying down," Kyle snarled, his voice laced with determination. "That money is rightfully ours, and we're going to get it back, one way or another." As he stormed out, I sank onto the couch, my mind racing with memories of Aunt Miriam's unwavering love and support. How had I let it come to this? How had I allowed myself to become so consumed by greed and selfishness, betraying the woman who had given me everything? The weight of my guilt was suffocating, but deep down I knew the truth. I had brought this upon myself, and as the gravity of my actions settled in, I couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to undo the damage I had caused, or if I had lost Aunt Miriam forever. The apartment felt suffocating, the weight of Aunt Miriam's rejection pressing down on me. I needed air, an escape from Kyle's seething rage and the memories that taunted me. Grabbing my coat, I slipped out, the crisp night offering a fleeting reprieve. As I wandered aimlessly, flashes of my childhood flickered through my mind. The night Dad didn't come home from work, Mom's anguished sobs as the police delivered the tragic news, The deafening silence that followed, an emptiness no 9-year-old should ever have to endure. Then Aunt Miriam's warm embrace, her gentle voice soothing my fears. "You're safe now, sweetheart. I'm here for you." She had been my lifeline, my anchor in the storm that threatened to sweep me away. Her modest home became a sanctuary, filled with the love and stability I had so desperately craved. But even then, the seeds of greed had taken root, planted by Kyle's manipulative parents. "That old lady's loaded," they would sneer. "Just you wait, Trina. One day, that fortune will be yours." Foolishly, I had let their poisonous words take hold, blinding me to Miriam's unconditional love. And as the years passed, Kyle's demands grew more insistent, his parents' influence more toxic. "She owes us," he would snarl, his eyes glinting with avarice. "After everything we've done for her, sacrificing our own lives to take care of that ungrateful hag." I knew it was a lie, a twisted justification for his greed. But I was too weak, too afraid to stand up to him, to risk losing the illusion of wealth he dangled before me like a carrot on a string. "Trina, darling," Aunt Miriam would plead, her eyes brimming with hurt. "I've given you everything I have. Why isn't it enough?" But her words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by Kyle's incessant demands and the siren song of his parents' promises of riches beyond my wildest dreams. Now, as I wandered the empty streets, the weight of my betrayal threatened to crush me. I had sacrificed the one person who had truly loved me, the one constant in my life, for the hollow allure of material wealth. Aunt Miriam's words echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the depth of my transgression. "You deserve nothing." And in that moment, I knew she was right. I had brought this upon myself, and the only one to blame was the person staring back at me in the cold, unforgiving reflection of the storefront window. The sound of Aunt Miriam's labored breathing filled the stifling hospital room. I shifted uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair, guilt gnawing at my insides as I watched her frail form struggle for each ragged breath. "You came," she whispered, her eyes flickering open, a glimmer of hope in their tired depths. I forced a smile, unable to meet her gaze. "Of course, Aunt Miriam. Where else would I be?" Her bony hand trembled as she reached for mine, and I flinched, the weight of my deceit threatening to crush me. "I'm so sorry, dear," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for things to end up like this." My throat constricted, the words I longed to say, the apology I owed her, stuck like shards of glass. But Kyle's voice echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the price of defiance. "Don't be ridiculous," I managed, forcing a hollow laugh. "You've done more than enough for me already." Aunt Miriam's face fell, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I wanted to give you everything, Trina, to make up for all the heartache you've endured." The guilt was suffocating, a vice around my chest that squeezed tighter with each shallow breath she took. I should have been the one comforting her, reassuring her that her love and support had been enough, more than enough. But the words never came. Instead, I sat in silence, a coward too afraid to break free from the chains of greed that bound me. Later that night, as Aunt Miriam slept fitfully, Kyle stormed into the room, his face contorted with rage. "Well?" he hissed, his eyes darting to the fragile figure in the hospital bed. "Did you get through to her? Make her see reason?" I shook my head, unable to meet his accusatory glare. "Useless," he spat, slamming his fist against the wall. "We're running out of time, Trina. That money is ours, and I'm not going to let some senile old bat stand in our way." His words cut deep, but I knew there was truth in them. We had sacrificed too much, endured too many years of her empty promises and hollow gratitude. It was time to take matters into our own hands. As Kyle ranted, his voice rising with each venomous syllable, I caught a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. Aunt Miriam's lids fluttered open, her gaze locking onto mine, a lifetime of hurt and betrayal reflected in those weary eyes. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. The fragile bond between us, once so strong and unbreakable, had been severed. And as the harsh reality of my actions washed over me, I couldn't help but wonder if I had lost her forever. The shrill ring of the phone sliced through the tense silence, shattering the fragile calm that had settled over our apartment. Kyle shot me a pointed glare as I reached for the receiver, his jaw clenched in silent warning. "Hello?" My voice trembled with trepidation. "Trina?" The nurse's voice was grave, laced with urgency. "It's your Aunt Miriam. There's been an incident. You need to come to the hospital right away. My heart plummeted, a cold dread washing over me. What happened? Is she okay? A waited pause then. She's fallen. Hit her head pretty hard. The doctors are doing everything they can, but... She trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The line went dead, but the implications lingered, a suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. I turned to Kyle, my mouth dry, struggling to find the words. Well? He snapped, his eyes narrowing with impatience. What is it? It's Aunt Miriam, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. She's hurt. Bad. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of concern crossed his features, quickly extinguished by the ever-present hunger that burned in his eyes. How bad? He demanded, leaning forward, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrests of his chair. I swallowed hard, the gravity of the situation threatening to crush me. They didn't say, just that we need to get to the hospital right away? Kyle's nostrils flared, his lips curling into a sneer. Of course they didn't, he spat, rising to his feet with a suddenness that made me flinch. They're probably just trying to milk us for more money, the vultures. His words hung in the air, a bitter accusation that stung like a slap to the face. I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my tongue, withering under the weight of his scathing glare. Well? He barked, grabbing his coat from the rack with a forceful tug. Are you coming or not? We can't let this opportunity slip through our fingers. Opportunity. The word left a sour taste in my mouth, a stark reminder of the depths to which we had sunk. Aunt Miriam was lying in a hospital bed, her life hanging in the balance, and all Kyle could think about was the inheritance that dangled before us like a tantalizing prize. But what choice did I have? I had made my bed long ago, sacrificing my principles and self-respect for the hollow promise of wealth and security. And now, as the consequences of my actions loomed ever closer, I found myself trapped, a prisoner of my own greed and cowardice. With leaden steps, I followed Kyle out the door, the weight of my guilt growing heavier with each stride. As we made our way to the hospital, the silence between us was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional muttered curse or impatient sigh. And through it all, a single thought echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain that chilled me to the core. What had I done? The antiseptic stench of the hospital corridor assaulted my senses as we made our way down the sterile hallway, each step echoing like a death knell. Kyle strode ahead, his gait determined, his eyes fixed on the prize that lay beyond the closed door at the end of the corridor. I trailed behind, my footsteps leaden, weighed down by the guilt that threatened to consume me. Aunt Miriam's fragile form flashed before my eyes, a haunting reminder of the depths to which I had sunk in my pursuit of her wealth. As we neared the room, the muffled sounds of voices drifted through the door. Nurses and doctors, their tones hushed and grave. A knot twisted in my stomach, but Kyle pressed on, undeterred. Without preamble, he flung open the door, the hinges protesting with a shrill creak. All eyes turned towards us, a dozen faces etched with shock and disapproval. Well? Kyle barked, his gaze sweeping the room with a callous indifference. What are you all gawking at? Where is she? A nurse stepped forward, her expression a mixture of pity and thinly veiled disdain. Mrs. Winslow is resting, she said, her voice clipped. She's been through quite an ordeal and needs her rest. Kyle scoffed, brushing past her with a dismissive wave of his hand. Resting? She'll have plenty of time for that once we get her affairs in order. My heart hammered in my chest as he approached the bed, his shadow looming over Aunt Miriam's frail form. She looked so small, so vulnerable, her face pale and drawn, marred by a vivid purple bruise that bloomed across her forehead. Aunt Miriam, Kyle crooned, his tone sickly sweet. It's us, your favorite niece and nephew. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed and unfocused. A flicker of recognition passed across her features, quickly extinguished by a wince of pain. Kyle, she rasped, her voice little more than a whisper. Trina, you came. Of course we did, Kyle replied, shooting me a pointed glare. We're family after all, and family looks out for one another, don't they? A tremor ran through me as the implication of his words sank in. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for, the opportunity to secure our future once and for all. That's why, Kyle continued, his tone taking on a harder edge, we need to have a little chat about your affairs, your will, your assets, everything. Aunt Miriam's brow furrowed, her eyes growing wide with alarm. My will? She echoed, her voice trembling. But I thought. You thought what? Kyle snapped, his veneer of concern cracking like a brittle mask. That we'd just let you squander everything you've worked for? That we'd stand idly by while you frittered it all away on frivolous nonsense? His words hung in the air, a damning accusation that cut straight to the bone. I wanted to protest, to defend Aunt Miriam's honor, but the words stuck in my throat, choked by the weight of my own complicity. As Kyle raged on, his voice rising to a fever pitch, I caught sight of the nurse hovering nearby, her expression a mixture of horror and disgust. In that moment, I knew we had crossed a line, one from which there was no turning back. And as the harsh reality of our actions washed over me, I couldn't help but wonder if we had finally gone too far, if the price of our greed was too steep, even for us. The crisp autumn air did little to soothe the burning ache in my chest as I made my way up the familiar path to Aunt Miriam's home. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the burden of shame and regret that had become my constant companion. As the stately manor came into view, memories assailed me, happy times spent in its warmth and comfort before greed had poisoned everything. I could almost hear the echoes of Aunt Miriam's laughter, the gentle melodies she would hum as she tended to her beloved garden. But those days were gone, lost to the relentless march of time and our own selfish desires. The door swung open before I could raise my hand to knock, and there she stood, Aunt Miriam, her once vibrant eyes now dulled by a mix of sorrow and resignation. "Trina," she said, her voice little more than a hoarse whisper, "I've been expecting you." I opened my mouth, but no words came. What could I possibly say to undo the hurt, the betrayal we had inflicted upon her? "Come in," she sighed, turning and disappearing into the dimly lit interior. I followed, each step feeling like a descent into the depths of my own personal hell. The once inviting foyer was now a mausoleum, the air thick with the weight of shattered dreams and broken promises. Aunt Miriam sank into her favorite armchair, her movements slow and labored, a stark contrast to the vibrant woman I remembered. She gestured for me to sit, her gaze unwavering, piercing straight through to my soul. "I know why you're here," she said, her voice barely audible above the ticking of the grandfather clock. "You want to know about the will." My heart hammered in my chest, the familiar ache of greed and longing stirring within me. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for, the opportunity to secure our future once and for all. But as I opened my mouth to speak, Aunt Miriam raised a trembling hand, silencing me before the words could leave my lips. "Don't bother," she said, her eyes hardening with a resolve I had never seen before. "I've made my decision, and nothing you or that wretched husband of yours can say will change it." A chill ran down my spine, her words cutting deeper than any knife. This was no idle threat. I could see it in the set of her jaw, the steely determination that burned in her gaze. "You're cutting us out?" I managed, my voice little more than a strangled whisper. Aunt Miriam's lips curved into a humorless smile, a bitter twist of the knife. "Cutting you out?" she echoed, her tone laced with a mix of pity and contempt. "My dear, you cut yourselves out long ago, the moment you decided that money and possessions were more important than family, than love." Her words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs and leaving me gasping for air. I wanted to protest, to defend our actions, but deep down, I knew she was right. We had brought this upon ourselves, sacrificing everything that truly mattered for the hollow allure of wealth and status. As the weight of her condemnation settled over me, I felt the last vestiges of hope slip away, replaced by a cold, bitter resignation. We had played the game, and we had lost. Spectacularly, irrevocably. And as I looked into Aunt Miriam's eyes, I saw not anger or hatred, but a profound sadness, a mourning for the family we had once been, and the love we had so carelessly squandered. In that moment, I knew there was no going back, no undoing the damage we had wrought. The only path left was forward, into the desolate wasteland of our own making. The deafening silence that hung over our apartment was suffocating, broken only by the occasional muffled sob or the clink of a glass against the coffee table. Kyle sat hunched in his chair, his eyes glazed and unfocused, a half-empty tumbler of amber liquid clutched in his trembling hand. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his words slurred and thick. Not after everything we've sacrificed. I said nothing, my own grief and shame rendering me mute. Aunt Miriam's words echoed in my mind, a damning refrain that played on an endless loop. You cut yourselves out long ago. How had it come to this? How had our relentless pursuit of wealth and status twisted us into the very monsters we had sworn never to become? A bitter chuckle escaped Kyle's lips, jarring me from my reverie. Well, he sneered, fixing me with a glare that cut straight to the bone. Aren't you going to say something? Or are you just going to sit there like a pathetic lump, as useless as ever? I flinched, his words like a physical blow. A part of me wanted to lash out, to defend myself against his vitriol, but what was the point? He was right. I was useless, a coward too afraid to stand up to him and his insatiable greed. We're not going to let this stand, you know, he growled, slamming his glass down with such force that I half expected it to shatter. That money is ours. Damn it. We've earned it, sacrificed everything for it. A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Earned it? I echoed, my voice dripping with contempt. Is that what you call it? Leeching off of Aunt Miriam's generosity, bleeding her dry with our constant demands and ingratitude? Kyle's eyes widened, his face flushing with rage. How dare you? He spat, surging to his feet and looming over me like a menacing shadow. After everything I've done for you, for this family? I met his gaze, unflinching. You mean everything you've done to tear this family apart? I shot back, my own anger rising to the surface like a tidal wave. Face it, Kyle, we brought this on ourselves. We let greed and selfishness consume us, and now we're paying the price. His hand lashed out, the back of his palm connecting with my cheek with a sickening crack. I recoiled, stars exploding across my vision as the metallic tang of blood filled my mouth. You ungrateful bitch, he snarled, towering over me like a wrathful giant. After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me. I said nothing, cradling my throbbing cheek as the weight of his words washed over me. He was right. He had given me everything, or at least the illusion of it. A life of comfort and luxury, dangled before me like a carrot on a string, always just out of reach. And in my desperation to grasp it, I had sacrificed the one thing that truly mattered. My integrity. My soul. As Kyle raged on, his voice rising to a fever pitch, I felt something within me shift, a profound weariness settling over me like a shroud. I was done, finished with the lies and the endless cycle of greed and recrimination. Slowly, I rose to my feet, my movements steady and resolute. Kyle fell silent, his eyes narrowing with suspicion as I met his gaze, unflinching. It's over, Kyle, I said, my voice low but laced with a steely determination. No more begging, no more pleading. We made our bed, and now we have to lie in it. His lips curled into a sneer, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the first cracks in his armor of bravado. You're really going to let that old hag win? He spat, his words laced with venom. After everything we've been through? I said nothing, simply turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in his own bitter juices. It was time to start over, to rebuild from the ashes of our shattered dreams and broken promises. And this time I vowed greed and selfishness would have no place in my life. This time I would be the master of my own destiny. The harsh glare of the neon open sign cast a sickly glow over the dingy diner, its flickering light a beacon for the weary souls who sought refuge within its cracked vinyl booths. I slid into one of the worn seats, the faded upholstery creaking in protest beneath my weight. The waitress, a world-weary woman with eyes like smudged charcoal, ambled over, her pen poised over a grease-stained pad. "What'll it be, hon?" she drawled, her voice a raspy monotone. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat, a lump of shame and regret rendering me mute. How had it come to this? How had I fallen so far from the gilded halls of opulence to the grim underbelly of despair? The waitress arched an eyebrow, her patience wearing thin. "Look, sweetheart, I ain't got all night. You want something or not?" I forced a nod, my throat constricting as I choked out the words. "Just coffee, black." She shrugged, scribbling on her pad before shuffling away, leaving me alone with the weight of my thoughts. Aunt Miriam's face flashed before my mind's eye, her once vibrant features etched with disappointment and sorrow. "You cut yourselves out long ago," she had said, her words a death knell for our dreams of wealth and comfort. And she had been right. We had brought this upon ourselves. sacrificing everything for the hollow allure of material gain. Now, as the bitter consequences of our actions bore down upon us, I found myself adrift, cast out into the unforgiving wilderness with nothing but the tattered remnants of my pride. The clink of ceramic against formica jolted me from my reverie. The waitress had returned, a steaming mug of black coffee in her hand. She set it down with a thud, sloshing some of the inky liquid over the rim and onto the battered tabletop. "There you go, Han," she muttered, already turning away. "Holler if you need anything else." I nodded numbly, my fingers curling around the warm mug as if seeking solace in its simple familiarity. As the rich aroma wafted up, mingling with the stale scent of grease and despair, a memory surfaced, unbidden. Aunt Miriam's kitchen, the gentle clatter of dishes and the comforting gurgle of the coffee pot, her soft humming, a soothing melody that would chase away the shadows of my turbulent childhood, the warmth of her embrace, her whispered words of love and reassurance. A solitary tear traced its way down my cheek, mingling with the bitter brew as I raised the mug to my lips. How I had squandered that love, trampled upon it in my blind pursuit of riches and status. The diner door swung open with a jangle, admitting a gust of chill night air and a familiar figure. Kyle, his once immaculate suit now rumpled and stained, his eyes hollow and haunted. He spotted me, his lips curling into a sneer as he made his way over, his gait unsteady. Well, he slurred, sliding into the booth across from me. "If it isn't the prodigal wife, slumming it with the dregs of society." I said nothing, simply took another sip of my coffee, the bitter liquid scalding my tongue. Kyle leaned forward, his breath hot and sour with the reek of cheap whiskey. "What's the matter, Trina?" he taunted, his voice dripping with venom. "Cat got your tongue? Or have you finally realized the depths of your failure, your utter uselessness?" His words cut deep, but I refused to rise to the bait. I had heard it all before, endured his vitriol and abuse for far too long. "You know," he continued, his eyes glinting with malice, "we could have had it all. Everything we ever wanted, everything we deserved. But you just had to go and ruin it, didn't you?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "I ruined it?" I echoed, my voice low but laced with steel. "Or did we ruin it together with our greed and selfishness?" Kyle recoiled as if struck, his bravado faltering for the briefest of moments. But the mask quickly slipped back into place, his features twisting into a sneer of contempt. "Don't try to pin this on me, you pathetic excuse for a wife," he spat, his words laced with venom. "This is all on you, and you know it." I shook my head, a weary sigh escaping my lips. "Keep telling yourself that, Kyle, but we both know the truth. We did this to ourselves, and now we're paying the price." His fist slammed down on the table, rattling the cheap crockery and drawing the attention of the few other patrons. "Shut your mouth," he snarled, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Just shut your damn mouth before I—" But I never got to hear the rest of his threat. With a sudden, decisive motion, I drained the last of my coffee, set the mug down with a hollow clink, and rose to my feet. "Save it, Kyle," I said, my voice laced with a calm finality. "I'm done. Done with your threats, your abuse, your endless cycle of blame and recrimination." His mouth worked soundlessly, his bravado stripped away to reveal the pathetic, broken shell of a man beneath. "I'm starting over," I continued, straightening my shoulders and meeting his gaze head-on. "And this time, I'm doing it on my own terms, without you, without the poison of greed and selfishness that nearly destroyed me." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Kyle to stew in his own bitter juices. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to atone for my mistakes, to rebuild from the ashes of my shattered dreams. And this time, I vowed, I would do it right.